true professional producer right here. Yeah, we can hit a solo and go to Adam when we introduce. What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Awesemo.com NBA Deeper Dive 10-game Friday slate, taking you into the weekend. I'm Dave Loughran at Laffy_D, LOUGHY_D on the Twitters. Give me a follow along with my man 5 days a week, Adam Scherer at ShipMyMoney DFS. Dude, we've got Toronto today. You've got the Pistons today. You've got the Thunder. Just an absolute mess of a slate. And we got an hour and 15 minutes to tackle this.
Yeah, kind of the exact opposite of what we had yesterday. No shortage of value today, no shortage of stuff to dive into and talk about.
Yesterday was kind of awful. Rinpack had another huge night, so big ups to him. Took down, I think, like 30 G's on DraftKings, so that's awesome. But it was one of those slates where you get the news midway through the night that Schroeder's not expected to play. Then Vogel's like, yeah, it's unlikely that he plays today, and he's in the starting lineup, so – oh, who knows? And apparently Drummond got his toe stepped on again a couple games ago. I'm happy to get away from that, but we're just jumping right back into the mix with a huge mess of a slate. So before we say hi to everybody and dive into this, give me your initial thoughts on this one. What do the builds look like so far? You said, just a bit of a spoiler here for anyone that uses Fantasy Cruncher and hasn't crunched yet with the Awesemo projections and ownership, that the optimal lineup is showing 5 Pistons tonight.
Yeah, it always makes for a fun slate when a bunch of guys from a team that is actively trying to lose games are showing up in lineups. So, it's going to be, I think, peak April NBA this season or tonight. But, it is a slate where you have several teams where there's a lot of value, Detroit being one of them to start the night off. But, a couple of other spots, you mentioned Toronto as well, where teams are just really, really shorthanded right now. And so you're going to get stars and scrubs builds. There are guys to pay up for tonight. You have Jokic in a great spot. You have Westbrook in a great spot. There's others as well. So it should be, I think, a very high scoring slate, a pretty fun slate to sweat your lineups most likely. Definitely not a slate that people who, get upset when they don't cash with 300 fantasy points. Not really a slate that they're going to enjoy too much, but I think there should be a lot of fantasy points scored.
All right, well, let's dive into it. And as I promised, happy to have you guys with us. Hit that thumbs up. Let's at least push this over 100 to kick off the show. We got 300 watching. Everyone just jumping in now, maybe getting home from work. It's almost 5 o'clock. We still got plenty of time to dive in. And remember, if you are watching these shows, you're watching the ones like this that don't have much of a shelf life, you can always go back. That's why we got this game list. So if you hop in late, you want to catch up on a game that maybe you missed, well, just go straight back, rewind, and then you can fast forward straight to being live again. Simple as that. Let's start it off at the beginning, 7 o'clock tip-off, New Orleans Pelicans, Washington Wizards. Pels 3-point favorites, 242 total. You're getting Lonzo back in action today. So really, let's start with, now that Lonzo's back, Ingram's pretty pricey, and then Zion on DraftKings is in the 10K range. As this team gets healthier and healthier, how much more difficult is it going to be to get to these guys? Or are we still looking towards a 10K Zion today, no problem?
I think it's going to be tougher to get there just because, anytime a team gets healthier, it's hard to roster guys when their salaries have increased. I do still think there's upside on these guys, though, particularly Zion. I mean, it is a very good matchup against Washington. They've played a bit better defensively recently. They're 14th in defensive rating over the last month, but they're still the fastest team in the league. And we've seen stretches this year where the Wizards do play a little bit better defensively just to very quickly revert to their norm of not playing any defense at all. So it is a good spot. The problem is just that, I kind of mentioned at the top, you have two excellent pay up options in Westbrook and Jokic. You have a number of other guys that you can get to, and you do have Lonzo coming back, which should cut into Zion's assist numbers a little bit. I think he's a good option in tournaments still, especially if you're playing a lot of lineups. Only projected for about 12% ownership, still very capable of going for 55, 60 fantasy points here against the Wizards. But it will be very difficult, I think, to prioritize him because, on DraftKings, you have those guys to pay up for. And then on FanDuel, where maybe it will be a little bit easier since you're forced into rostering 2 power forwards, FanDuel has 3 different value centers listed at power forward tonight. So the opportunity cost at the position there is kind of high, and it'll make it relatively difficult to get to Zion.
How difficult was it writing the deep dives today?
It wasn't really that tough because you know how it is. Like when there's guys that you don't like, when there's not that many guys that you like, it's kind of harder to write the article.
Yesterday was impossible.
Right. Today, I didn't have that issue. I had the issue of like
too much,
not writing, 40 pages, but
right. Exactly. I always look at a slate and you and I used to switch off the deep dive like every day back in the day. I'd always look at a slate and I'd see only a few games and I'd get real stoked about it until I had to write up each position and realize that some positions didn't have a single player I liked.
Yeah, you end up using so many throwaway lines like, I don't really like this guy, but I like him, less, or I like him more than everyone else.
Yeah. Or he's averaging 32 minutes on the month. Like,
right.
That's all there is. But it is the most comprehensive DFS article for free that you're going to find out there. Adam's giving you every play that he thinks is solid for this 10-game slate, position by position. You don't have to pay a dime for it any day of the week. Go to awesemo.com. It should be right on the homepage. It's the NBA Deep Dive. I'm looking at the ownership for New Orleans, and outside of a little bit going to Zion, there just really isn't much. Are you getting to anything else from the Pels?
Not really. I mean, I think the ownership being low makes sense. Ingram's a little more expensive than you would like. Lonzo, a little more expensive than you would like. All these guys come with very high ceilings here, but outside of, kind of if you're playing 150 lineups and just using one as like a last piece in to be somewhat contrarian, outside of that, I don't think they really stand out as priorities.
Tulsa Dogs is Lafayette Celtics green. What in the world? This is white, pal. I don't know what to tell you, unless there's something else I'm missing. Do you like the Wizards at all against the Pels? Again, this is I think it's actually the highest total game on the slate. So Westbrook keeps adding triple doubles to his repertoire or to his resume from this season. He's averaging a 22, 11, and 11 triple double on the season. Doesn't matter if Beal's here or not. He just keeps producing. And then Beal is sub 9K on DraftKings. You're getting him at least a reasonable price if you feel like going there. Any of the top dogs from Washington today stand out to you?
Yeah, Westbrook and Beal both do. I mean, you mentioned the triple doubles for Westbrook. He's triple doubled in 6 straight games now, at least 9 of his last 10. I think it's an even longer streak than that. That's just as far back as I bothered to look. And you get a fast-paced New Orleans team here, so it should be a very high-scoring game, like you said. Westbrook for the season, we said it a lot, but averaging a triple double even with Beal, like 1.55 DraftKings points per minute when Beal plays. Since the All-Star break, he's at about 1.65 DraftKings points per minute when Beal plays. And he's not really, I mean, Westbrook obviously is expensive now, but it's not like his salary keeps going up. He's kind of just at this price point and he's staying there around 11K. So especially on DraftKings where you get that triple double bonus, you don't get penalized very heavily for turnovers. Westbrook looks really, really good. On FanDuel, I don't have any problem with Westbrook either, but I do think it's a little bit more difficult to roster him just because the scoring doesn't favor him as much. You have, for example, Terry Rozier, who's $1,300 or $1,100 less on FanDuel than on DraftKings. So a little bit more difficult to prioritize him, but still, by all means, if you get to him on FanDuel, he looks really good. And then Beal, I think, fits really nicely into builds on either site because shooting guard's nowhere near as deep as point guard is today. That was actually a pretty difficult position to go through in the deep dive article. And you have him for 8,400 on FanDuel, 8,900 on DraftKings. He hasn't played very well since the All-Star break. He was, dealing with the hip injury, but he's played at least 36 minutes in back-to-back games now. Doesn't appear to be limited anymore by the injury, and the salary has come down. So even if he's not 100%, even if he's not going to produce quite to the rate that he was earlier this year, the salary accounts for that at this point. So I think there's a lot more upside than downside for Beal at his salary right now.
Yeah, 8,400 on FanDuel, 31.6% projected ownership. We haven't had an update in about 2 hours, so we'll see what happens when we do. What about guys like Rui? Because he's really the only other guy that we can even talk about for Washington. Aside from that, I don't think there's much that we even need to delve into, given that we have so many games to touch on. Rui on DraftKings is getting nothing. On FanDuel, his price point is sitting at 4,900, and it appears that he might get a little bit of attention. Is it worthwhile to you?
It's kind of a last guy in, I guess. It's not someone I'm really seeking out, but he is playing big minutes still. He's still playing like 34 minutes in competitive games. He takes a usage hit as you would expect when Beal is active. And so that's something you have to keep in mind. So, if he lands in some lineups, I think it's fine, but it's not someone I'm really seeking out. I don't think he's a really great play on either side. But beyond that, like you said, nothing else I really see on Washington. I do think Daniel Gafford wins someone a GPP sometime in the next couple of weeks, but this doesn't strike me as the slate where I'm really going to go there because there's so many cheap centers that probably are going to play 10 minutes more than Gafford.
All right. Yeah, exactly. And not just centers. I mean, there's a decent amount of value pretty much everywhere. And we'll get to someone that's similarly priced, like you said, at the center position shortly, that kind of makes it a moot point to begin with. But first we got to kick off or hit on, OKC and Detroit. I'm going to give you as much time as you need on this one. First, let's try and plow through this OKC team. 3.5 point dogs, 216 total. SGA looks like he's close to returning. Pogashevsky, as someone nicknamed him in chat, Alexei Pogostick, they are both out. Is there anything for OKC at first glance here, or given that you've dug deep into this slate already, that is viable to you? Because I look at all of these guys and I see, yeah, okay, Dort's coming off that huge 42-point game in a tough matchup, but he's only getting like 7% ownership. No one's really popping off at all here. And I think a lot of that just has to do with this Thunder team's awful.
Yeah, they are. But I do have interest in a few guys from OKC, especially in tournaments, because I don't think that they stand out as the top options at their price points. For example, they have counterparts on the other side of this game that are going to project better, but that is going to keep the ownership in check for Darius Baisley, for Lou Dort, for Isaiah Roby, who's 5K on DraftKings and only 4,100 on FanDuel. I do think that if this game's competitive, you're getting around 30 to 32 minutes from Baisley, probably the same boat from Lou Dort, and probably 28 to 30 minutes from Roby. Dort, we had talked about it before, but he's got a 27.5% usage rate in the games he's played without SGA. He's averaging about a fantasy point per minute. And he's just someone that, I think gives you a lot higher ceiling than people give him credit for when SGA is out, but he doesn't project quite as well as some of the guys from Detroit. So it's going to keep the ownership down. Baisley's around 0.85 fantasy points per minute. Roby's in that same ballpark. I think all three guys are somewhat useful pieces in tournaments, but probably not finding their way into my cash lineup.
Do you think Dort's under-owned right now then?
Yes and no. I don't want to say under-owned because there are so many good plays. I don't necessarily think that. I think he's getting 5 or 6% ownership right now on DraftKings. I don't think it's like a mistake.
3% on FanDuel.
Yeah, I don't think it's a mistake, but I think he's a good option as far as someone that is relatively low-owned that does have a higher ceiling. I think that people are going to give him credit for. The reason he's low-owned has nothing to do with him, basically. It just has to do with the fact that Detroit is starting their bench. Toronto is starting their bench. Like there's so many teams that are even more shorthanded than Oklahoma City is.
Well, one of those teams would be the team that the OKC Thunder are facing, the Detroit Pistons. This is absolutely hideous. Jeremy Grant's out. Mason Plumlee's out. Corey Joseph's out. Dennis Smith Jr., Wayne Ellington out. Rodney Magruder hasn't played in like 3 weeks. He's out. And now Hamidou Diallo hits the injury report with a questionable tag. So they are going to be massively shorthanded. A ton of their starters aren't going to be in the lineup to begin with. And now we have to filter through who is worthwhile today. How many are we willing to play in the same lineup? And are you on board with the fact that as it stands right now, the 4 highest owned players on DraftKings are all Detroit Pistons?
Yeah, it scares me. The thing that scares me the most here is they still have, if Diallo plays, they have 11 bodies. If he sits, they have 10. So you have a team here full of guys who aren't very good at basketball, who are going to be really, really popular. And it's a team that does not care about winning. They would like to lose this game. They're competing with OKC to lose more games, basically. And so there's just so many ways that this rotation can still go sideways. They still have the bodies to do it. But at the same time, this whole team is just so underpriced that they project like really, really good options. And I think that, obviously they should be getting the ownership that they are. You look to Josh Jackson, who his playing time is inconsistent at best, but unless they just completely say screw it and don't even try to do anything close to winning this game, you assume that you're going to get 28 to 30 minutes from Jackson. He's over a fantasy point per minute player without these guys on the floor. Usage rate up close to 28% this year without Grant or Derrick Rose or Griffin or Plumlee on the floor. Saddiq Bey should play big minutes because he's at least a first-round pick that they're looking to develop. He's not the most productive player, but he's someone that I would expect him to play more minutes than anyone else on this Detroit team tonight. So both of those guys stand out. You have Isaiah Stewart, who's over a fantasy point per minute guy and has averaged about 28 minutes per game in his 4 starts this year in place of Plumlee. He's cheap and a power forward on FanDuel, which is really nice. Diallo, if he plays, is a fantasy point per minute guy or close to it. And then you have the point guard position between Killian Hayes, Saben Lee, and Frank Jackson, where 2 of those 3 guys are probably going to play enough minutes that they're useful value options. The problem is just that none of them are very good. Killian Hayes has been really bad in his rookie year, but even he has averaged almost a fantasy point per minute without these guys on the floor. So it's just really difficult to get away from the Pistons, even though I don't want to be there. Like I can fully see how this goes wrong, but they're just so cheap and there's so many shots to go around.
In tournaments, what are you willing to do? How many of them are you willing to have in the same lineup? Are you going to set any rules against getting too many?
I mean, I'll still most likely would cap it at 3. That's typically what I do in tournaments. And with this being a 10-game slate and there being so many good plays, I really don't want to keep just jamming Pistons into my tournament lineups. I think in cash games, however many you get to is fine. But as far as rules go, I wouldn't roster Isaiah Stewart and Jahlil Okafor together. Okafor, by the way, back in the rotation now. So that's another body where he can screw things up, and he's only 3K. But I wouldn't play those guys together. I don't think I would play more than 2 of Killian Hayes, Saben Lee, and Frank Jackson together. Those are, I think, the 2 rules that really stand out, without diving into like Sekou Doumbouya and Tyler Cook and those guys.
All right. So then last question for Detroit. I want to make sure we're getting to everything here because it's even, honestly, even in April in a regular NBA season. Now, granted, this one's going to go a little bit further, but even in April in a regular NBA season, it's unusual that you see 4 guys on the same team on DraftKings getting like 30+% ownership each. You have Jackson Hayes, Saddiq Bey, and Stewart all pulling 28+%, giving you a little inside information here from our Awesemo ownership projections. 19.6% for Diallo right now. You've got 6 of them in the double digits right now because Saben Lee is also pulling low double digits. How would you rank these guys today if you're factoring in just overall appeal, but also ownership as well? I know it's a tough question, but
yeah,
some people are playing single entries and stuff. They're
just all so similar. It's kind of, I honestly don't even think I would be looking to like prioritize the Pistons amongst each other. I think it's more so
prioritize position.
Yeah, to kind of just fill in whatever you need. Like there's not a huge difference. None of these guys look drastically underowned.
Right.
There's not one guy from Detroit that I'm looking at saying, oh, this is like a fantastic play. I don't know how he fails, because I can tell you exactly how every single one of them fail. But I think it's more so like, if my lineup has Westbrook and Jokic and, I don't know, pays like another center or something, then that lineup obviously isn't going to have Isaiah Stewart. I'll just use the other Pistons to fill it out. But I think that they're all pretty similar. Stewart, Bey, Hayes, Jackson probably being the ones that I feel the best about, but Diallo not far behind either.
All right. There's always something in chat that makes me laugh. Sometimes I can't even talk about it. Anything else for the Pistons?
So I guess one other thing, because you mentioned, that it's unusual, especially on a slate this big, to have that many guys from the same team pulling so much ownership.
Wouldn't you agree?
No, I do agree.
Oh, okay.
But the thing is too, like, even though these guys for the most part aren't very good basketball players, the Pistons actually do still have players available that contribute from a fantasy standpoint.
Yeah.
Jackson's,
and they're cheap because this is the first game with all of them being out. So they're all cheap. They're not priced up to reflect these guys being out for 5 games like the Raptors have been.
Yeah, exactly. And they're not PJ Tucker type guys for the most part. Like Josh Jackson, if you put him on the floor without someone that's going to take the ball away from him, Josh Jackson's just going to shoot. Isaiah Stewart produces. Amadou Diallo, similar. He's going to go out there and just contribute stats. These guys are good fantasy producers that are now getting a bunch of minutes, or hopefully getting a bunch of minutes.
It's a good point. And that's, again, one of the reasons you're the most, get this, on DraftKings, the most expensive active player tonight for the Pistons is $5,300 Josh Jackson. There isn't someone that has a higher price point than he does.
Yeah. By the way, Josh Jackson only having power forward eligibility on DraftKings is a pretty weird spot for them to take a stand against their MPE, I think.
Why do I feel like he had shooting guard eligibility 2 weeks ago?
I think he's been a shooting guard small forward like all season long.
That's what I mean, right?
Yeah.
He was shooting guard small forward.
Yeah, and he's still a shooting guard on FanDuel.
Now he's just straight power forward. That doesn't make any sense at all. All right. No, it's a fine answer. If I'm asking you for priorities, and the answer is, well, how do you prioritize all these guys when they're pretty much very similar and all similarly priced? It makes sense. Let's talk about the Clippers and Philly then. I don't think we'll spend nearly as much time on this one, but the Clippers are 3-point dogs, 220.5 total. Kawhi Leonard's questionable, and then Ibaka and Pat Beverly remain out. If we're kicking it off on the Clippers side, assuming Kawhi Leonard and Paul George play, is there anything you want to get to at all from the Clippers tonight?
No, if they're both in, I have a really difficult time getting to anything. Philadelphia is one of the least appealing matchups you can get to in DFS. And then you also have some elevated price tags because of Kawhi and or George being out recently. So if they're both in, it's really tough to get to anything. George not on the injury report, Kawhi is questionable. So if Kawhi sits, it does bump Paul George. He's about 1.4 DraftKings points per minute without Kawhi since last year, but it is still a tough matchup against Philly. It is still a shooting guard position where it's not the deepest position, but you do have an underpriced Bradley Beal. You do have an underpriced Fred VanVleet. So George would certainly look better if Leonard sits, and I would start to have some interest. But in this matchup, I still don't know that he jumps to the top of the position for me.
Okay. I think the whole conversation surrounding Joel Embiid too is one that we probably want to have. Is Ivica Zubac capable of slowing him down? Is there anyone that can slow him down today? And against a good Clippers team at home in what should be a close game, we saw Joel Embiid play 33 minutes in that 6-point win over the Brooklyn Nets. And you and I have both been saying, if he gets the minutes, you just know you're going to get big blow-up games from Embiid in some of these spots. He gave us 39 and 13 with 64 DraftKings points on 29 field goal attempts and 10 for 11 free throw shooting. The volume, the usage is huge. Elite rebounder, quality shot blocker. He'll even give you a few dimes. 10 games today. Your pay-up options outside of Joel Embiid are Russell Westbrook, Nikola Jokic with no Jamal Murray facing the Houston Rockets, Luka Doncic, Karl Anthony Towns, and then, of course, Joel Embiid at 10.5. Zion rounding out 10K, that 10K range. What are you doing with Embiid, if anything?
I have some interest in tournaments. Like, I don't see how you get to him in cash games because Jokic is in a superior spot. He most likely plays more minutes. He produces at a higher rate playing without Murray. But I was really interested looking at the boom bust tool to see how Alex was viewing this. And it's pretty much what I expected. You're getting like 6% ownership going to Embiid with about an 8% chance of being in the optimal lineup. You're getting about 28% ownership going to, or 27% going to Jokic with a 21% chance of being the optimal lineup. So basically 2 to 3 times Jokic, 2 to 3 times is likely to be in the optimal lineup, but getting 4 to 5 times as much ownership as Embiid is. And whenever you see something like that, it doesn't mean that Jokic is a bad tournament play or, you have to play Embiid over him, but it does tell you that's a spot where it probably is profitable. If you could play this slate 1,000 times and you decided to make a stand where you play Embiid instead of Jokic, you probably do make money on that stand, even though Jokic is a great play. So I do think Embiid has a role in tournaments just because he is going to be low owned. He does average 1.65 DraftKings points per minute, but in terms of prioritization and, what percentage are you going to get to, it's really tough to get to him over Jokic in a large percentage of lineups. It's really tough to get to him over Westbrook, across positions. I think I would put him 3rd or 4th amongst those 10K guys, right up, alongside Zion, basically.
Coach Bell, we save those conversations for the morning strategy show when we are not up against a time limit. So tune in Monday through Sunday, every single day of the week. We got you covered. Strategy show, 10 a.m. Eastern time. Josh Ingham and myself, 4 days a week as well. Tobias Harris is questionable. Dwight Howard is questionable. I don't know how much of an impact Dwight makes, but he is getting, essentially all of the backup center minutes. By the way, did he play? He missed last game, right? Okay. He missed last game. Yeah. And then he played 21 minutes before that. I was going to say, hold on a second. He played 21 and Embiid played 33. There's no way they played alongside each other. That doesn't make sense.
They did that one time this year.
Did they?
Yeah. One of the games they had like 9 people.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. Yeah. I don't anticipate that happening today. Anyway, Tobias Harris, assuming he's in, is there anything you like here? And if he's out, do you really want to take stabs at like Mike Scott or hope that maybe Furkan Korkmaz starts and they shift the rotation down or Matisse Thybulle and try and take guesses on that? Because I have no interest in trying to guess that rotation.
I don't either. The one thing that I could see maybe taking a shot on if Harris is out is maybe throwing some Shake Milton in the tournament lineups, hoping that they slide guys down. Simmons plays the 4, Milton gets more run. You could see that happen. And Milton's at least someone that produces at a pretty high rate if he gets the minutes. I really, on this particular slate, don't see myself looking to roll the dice on Matisse Thybulle or Mike Scott or these guys that don't produce anyway unless they run into like 8 steals. So yeah, if Harris is in, there's nothing really beyond Embiid for me. If Harris is out, there's still not much for me beyond Embiid. But if you're playing a ton of lineups and really want something from the Sixers, I could see rolling the dice on Shake Milton.
You want to move on though? Charlotte, Brooklyn, get away from this game then?
Yeah, lots to talk about here.
All right, well, Charlotte on the road, 12.5-point dogs, 222.5 total. No Devontae Graham. PJ Washington's doubtful. Brad Wanamaker's questionable. Obviously, you don't have Gordon Hayward. You don't have LaMelo Ball. You don't have Malik Monk. So you're already dealing with a litany of injuries here. They have a skeleton crew to begin with. And now you eliminate a few guys that would have been starters had they been active today. Terry Rozier, probably going to have monster usage in this one. Miles Bridges, look for him to get a lot of minutes. And then you're throwing in the Jalen McDaniels of this world. So break this one down for us. Where do we go to for a team that's down so many key players from this rotation?
Yeah, the Hornets would be getting a lot more ownership today if the Pistons didn't exist. And you've also gotten, prices rising a little bit, especially on DraftKings. But Terry Rozier is going to have to do so much offensively for this team. He's actually played 106 minutes this year without any of Hayward, Graham, LaMelo Ball, or Malik Monk on the floor. And he has a 30.5% usage rate, 20.5% assist percentage, 1.18 DraftKings points per minute. He's very likely to play 35 plus minutes tonight. He's averaging about 36 minutes per game without Hayward and Ball. So I think he looks good. Does look a lot better on FanDuel at 7K than he does on DraftKings at 8,100. But either site, he comes with a very high ceiling. Miles Bridges kind of just produces 0.85 DraftKings points per minute, no matter who's on the floor with him. But he plays 36 plus minutes now that they're shorthanded. So he's a reasonable mid-range value as well. Jalen McDaniels has seen his price tag come up. He's another guy where, if he lands in some lineups, that's fine. I don't think he's drastically undervalued, but there is still some value there. And then you get to the cheaper guys. Looking at Caleb Martin in particular, started last game he started 2 games ago when Terry Rozier was out alongside Devontae Graham. My guess is that he gets the start today alongside Terry Rozier. He played about 34 or 35 minutes in that game. He's still close to minimum salary, and he's a little over a 0.8 fantasy point per minute guy this year. So if he starts, I think he looks like a very good value. Brad Wanamaker, if he's active, probably plays 24 to 26 minutes off the bench. He's another guy that produces about 0.9 to 1 fantasy points per minute and is cheap. So I could see going to Wanamaker as well.
The Borrego rotations always confuse me. I think we've talked about this. They're frustrating the way he staggers players and doesn't really have any consistent backups. Do you think Wanamaker's active? We can lock him in to solid minutes here.
I think he plays around 26 if he's active.
Okay.
My concern is that 2 games ago when Rozier was out, he still only played like 23 minutes.
And most people thought he was going to start, and he came off the bench. Yeah.
Yeah, but I still think I view that kind of as the floor for him. Like he's most likely going to play at least 23 or 24 minutes. I think there's a good chance if he's active, he gets 26, and he's cheap enough where it's not the end of the world if he does only play 23 or 24.
He's not just cheap, but he's very low owned right now. Now, if you remember a couple of games ago, his ownership was sky high, and I'm assuming it dropped once we found out he wasn't starting, but it wouldn't have dropped to 8%. He still would have been probably double that. So
yeah, but I mean, you also like on this slate, you have the Pistons, you have Monte Morris at the same price as Wanamaker.
Yeah. I guess the question is, when it comes to Wanamaker, though, I just find Borrego unpredictable. So it wouldn't shock me if he ended up playing 30 minutes. It's just a huge risk. Maybe it's an unnecessary one.
There's definitely a possibility that Borrego is just of the mindset, like, I'm going to play Wanamaker 25 minutes. I don't care who is in or out for my team.
Yeah, sure. That's fair too. Okay, then would you say Terry Rozier is a top overall option, one of your top options today?
On FanDuel, yeah. On DraftKings, he's fine, but he just is a lot more of a priority on FanDuel, I think. Bridges, I think, is kind of someone that just slides into some lineups. And then Caleb Martin, if he starts, I think is one of the better value options. What
about Brooklyn? Still no James Harden. LaMarcus Aldridge just abruptly retired. but you do have Kyrie Irving. You have Kevin Durant. It seems like a wholly unappealing team today on pretty much every level. Anything I'm missing?
I have interest in Kevin Durant, especially we have him projected for 1.6% ownership on DraftKings right now,
He
with a
came
5% chance of being
in our latest update.
What'd you say?
He came up to 2% in our update from 13 minutes ago.
Oh, okay. So yeah, point still stands there.
Exactly.
That Kevin Durant's getting virtually no ownership, at least right now, in our ownership projections. And the playing time, of course, is the question mark here, but he's averaged 1.47 DraftKings points per minute in the games that he's played without Harden and with Kyrie active this year. In Brooklyn, in the last game that Durant played, he played about 27 minutes for Brooklyn, and that was a game that blew out. I don't think that he really lost minutes to garbage time, but what I found interesting and makes me optimistic about his playing time is that he subbed in earlier for his second stint of the second half than he normally would. So it kind of just struck me as a spot where Brooklyn was trying to ramp him up to say 27, 28 minutes. And so it makes me think there's a decent chance that we get 30, 31 minutes from him today. If he's going to be that low owned, then he's obviously at a discount. Like if Kevin Durant were playing 36, 37 minutes, he would be close to 11K without James Harden. So he's at a big discount here. If there's a chance you can get 30, 31 minutes from Durant, I think he's a really, really interesting play as long as the ownership's low.
Would you go to anything else from Brooklyn?
No.
All right. If we move it on then to the Orlando Magic and Toronto Raptors, here's another fun one. Buckle your seatbelts for this one. Orlando Magic, amazingly, just given all of the injuries to Toronto, are only 2.5 point dogs, 212.5 total. MCW going to miss a few games. Mo Bamba's questionable. The big news will come on the other side of this one. But first with Orlando, Terrence Ross. You would really think that given the opportunity, which he has been given, especially since the trade deadline, that he would be ripping off as many shots as possible. But he went 2 straight games with 6 or fewer field goal attempts. And it just seems like he's not really the same Terrence Ross I expected to see since that trade deadline happened and they shipped off every quality player to another team in order to rebuild for the future. Does Terrence Ross have any tournament value today? Just thinking, hey, maybe he can be that guy that's going to shoot 25 times like we've seen do so many times in the past? Or should we be looking at this as the new kind of baseline or new expectation for Terrence Ross?
Yeah, I mean, he's still capable of it. You know, we've seen him do it before in situations that he's competing. He has more competition for shots, but it's definitely concerning that we haven't really seen that become the norm for him. And so, especially where you're looking at a somewhat elevated price tag for him, I think it's tough to have much confidence there. There are a couple pieces from Orlando that I'm interested in more so than Ross. You know, I think looking to the front court with Wendell Carter Jr., he's most likely going to play around 30 minutes here. You have Kem Birch now on the Raptors, not on Orlando. And Carter's actually been productive since joining the Magic. He's averaged about 1.15 DraftKings points per minute. He's not, I wouldn't say he's a priority just because the center position is pretty stacked, but I think that he does have some upside here. And then Cole Anthony interests me because you have Carter Williams out. He played between 20 and 21 minutes last game, but he played every minute that Michael Carter Williams was not on the floor. In previous games, you'd been seeing 25, 26 minutes from Cole Anthony, and he's actually been very productive this year when he's played without Vucevic, Aaron Gordon, or Evan Fournier on the floor. He's averaged 1.14 DraftKings points per minute in 242 minutes played. He has a 33% assist percentage, 26.9% usage rate. I think that you could see a big game from Cole Anthony here relative to his price tag. So him and Carter are the guys that I'm most interested in from the Orlando side.
Nobody else really?
No, not really.
On the Toronto side, here's another spot where ownership is going to be pretty heavy. We already talked about Detroit ownership, significant there. With Toronto, you have no Pascal Siakam, you have no Kyle Lowry, you have no OG Anunoby, Gary Trent's doubtful, and DeAndre Bembry is questionable. Now, it's funny because Nick Nurse, like less than a week ago, said Fred VanVleet wasn't close to returning, Adam. And now here he is after serving that suspension for that fight or leaving the bench, I think it was, against the Lakers. And he's back today off the injury report, expected to play. Should we be looking at VanVleet as someone who, hey, you say, okay, Nick Nurse, we know how this guy runs his rotations. He runs them tight. He gives his starters as many minutes as possible. And we're going to see VanVleet thrown back into the fire because if he wasn't expected to return and now he's just returning out of nowhere, should you look at that as, well, he might be limited or he must be fine? What do you think?
My guess is that he's fine. Nick Nurse lies to the media constantly.
Yeah.
So I mean, the guy lies about his starting lineup 30 minutes before he has to announce it. So I'm not, I'm taking anything he has said previously about Van Vliet with a grain of salt. This is a game where clearly Toronto does not care at all. If he was injured, I can't imagine he's playing in this game. So I'm assuming that Van Vliet plays at least close to his normal minutes, and he's going to have to do close to everything for this offense. You don't have Siakam. You don't have Lowry. You probably don't have Trent. You don't have OG Anunoby. It's just a spot where Van Vliet, I think, is pretty clearly underpriced to go up against the shorthanded Orlando team as really the only actual scorer on his team.
I want to backpedal for a quick second. Tobias Harris is now doubtful, or as Doc Rivers put it, unlikely to play.
So starting.
Right. I was going to say, if you're taking a page out of Frank Vogel's book, you're going to be seeing a lot of Tobias Harris tonight. But it's funny, we talked about before, and it's something we forgot to hit on. You and I talked about how we're not really fond of trying to get to Mike Scott. Maybe you take a couple shots on Milton. They kind of move the rotation down to fit in some more smaller guys. We've seen it with Dybul. We've seen him at Korkmaz. We didn't talk about how this affects Joel Embiid. If they're at home, assuming this Tobias isn't going to move the line that much, maybe a point or so, assuming he doesn't play, you take the only other significant usage player off the floor in the starting lineup. What happens to Joel Embiid now? Because there's no Jamal Murray for Jokic. But if there's no Tobias Harris for Embiid, can we expect even more usage for Joel tonight?
So he's played 4 games with Simmons active and Harris inactive this year. 34.3% usage rate, 21.7% rebounding percentage, 26.5% assist percentage. He's averaged 1.95 DraftKings points per minute.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not bad. I don't think that continues, but it does make sense for him to see increased usage. But, again, in the games that he's played with Harris and with Simmons, his usage rate is 34.9%. So it's about the same. The rebounding percentage, 18.7%. And the assist percentage, 14.3%. Those have both come up in the games where Harris is out. I think it makes sense for the rebounding numbers to come up. I don't think Harris being out should double Joel Embiid's assist percentage over a bigger sample. So I think it is a bump for Embiid. I do think Harris being out increases his ceiling, but I don't think that there's any one stat where Embiid benefits the way that Jokic benefits from Murray being out.
All right, fair. We'll move it back then to the Toronto Raptors because we're definitely not done talking about them. With all of these guys out today and the price points where they are, they fluctuated so much lately because Van Vliet's been out, Lowry's been out, Anunoby's been out, Bembry's had games where he's been sidelined. It's just a never-ending game of musical chairs in Toronto right now. Now you have no Siakam, Lowry, Anunoby, probably no Trent. Who are our top options from Toronto today?
So last game they started Chris Boucher alongside Khem Birch. I'm assuming you're going to get the same front court today since Siakam is out as well. And, obviously he started alongside them last game. But that opens the door for both of those guys to play steady minutes. Boucher played about 33.5 minutes. Birch played just shy of 30. Khem Birch has averaged 0.9 DraftKings points since joining the Raptors, 0.8 overall this season, including his time with Orlando, who he's facing tonight. So he's someone that I think stands out as a good value at 3,800 on DraftKings, $4,000 power forward on FanDuel. Boucher, I like quite a bit more starting alongside Birch than I would if Birch were coming off the bench, just because I think it signals that you're obviously going to get minutes with those two alongside each other. So it means that Boucher can play more minutes again. He's averaged 1.2 DraftKings points per minute this year. If you're getting 30 to 34 minutes, somewhere in that range from Boucher, he's pretty clearly underpriced tonight.
All right. So Malachi Flynn, $6,200. He's pretty much in line to play big minutes. You take Trent off the floor as well. That's not going to do anything to hurt him. Are you giving Flynn another 35 today?
Yeah, I think you get mid-30s again from Flynn. And I think that he's still a good – I think he's still a good play on DraftKings. He's an even better play on FanDuel where he's $700 less expensive. And I mean, my only concern with Flynn is the same thing I've said before, that in the limited number of games that he has started, I think his per-minute production has been – artificially inflated by a ridiculous number of blocks and steals. But still, for the season, he's like a 0.8 fantasy point per minute guy. He's averaged about a fantasy point per minute in these recent games. Even if you assume he's somewhere in the middle playing a bunch of minutes on a shorthanded Toronto team, you're still talking about 35, 36 minutes of 0.9 fantasy points per minute at a very reasonable price tag against a bad Orlando team. So I'm still on board with Flynn. It's just, again, I'm a little concerned about how he's gotten his fantasy points so far.
How much Watanabe are you willing to get to?
I don't think you really need him here.
Okay.
Like
I only ask because he's getting 10% on DraftKings, at least right now.
Yeah, we've seen slates before where he randomly gets ownership too, and then steals the ball 8 times and scores 30 points in 15 minutes. He's just kind of, I don't anticipate him playing a ton of minutes. Like the Raptors still have enough bodies here. I think Rodney Hood plays ahead of him. I think that Stanley Johnson probably plays similar minutes, maybe a few less than Watanabe. Paul Watson should be in the rotation. I'm expecting that you get sort of just a dice roll from these other Toronto guys. Like Rodney Hood probably plays the most minutes, but he's averaged 0.6 fantasy points per minute. So you're not going to feel great about him. Paul Watson probably gets you 20 to 22 minutes. Watanabe probably in that same range. So if you're getting to some Watanabe, I think it's okay, but I don't think it's somebody that should be getting a ton of ownership.
All right. And last question. Aaron Baines isn't playing any minutes, if playing at all. He didn't even see the floor last time out. How many minutes are you giving Boucher?
30 to 33. He played 33 and a half last game. I think somewhere in that ballpark is a good guess. It's always tough, with Boucher, but as I was saying, I think him playing alongside Birch is a very good signal for his playing time.
For sure. Let's move to Denver and Houston then, unless you have anything else with this Toronto team.
No, that's it.
All right, Denver, no Jamal Murray for the rest of the season. Huge blow to their chances to make a deep push into the postseason. They should get an easy win tonight, though, or at least you would hope. 8.5-point favorites, 226.5 total against the Houston Rockets. Now, outside of Jamal Murray, there isn't a single injured player on this team. But really, where we have to start, unquestionably, is Nikola Jokic. I know he hasn't looked amazing recently, right? He's come back down to earth by his own standards. He's still dropping 50-plus every night. But without Jamal Murray, his rates are so good that it makes it almost impossible to overlook him, especially in a matchup against this Houston Rockets squad.
Yeah, you get a fast-paced Houston team that doesn't defend well. You get Jokic, who already is one of the best fantasy producers in the league in terms of points per minute, but also averaging 35 to 36 minutes per game. And then now you take out Jamal Murray, which leads to even more assists for Jokic. We had talked about it prior to his last game, that during that 4-game stretch where Murray was out previously, Jokic averaged about 20 potential assists per 36 minutes compared to about 13 and a half potential assists per 36 minutes for the season. In the game he played last time out, he had 13 potential assists in 32 minutes, so about 14 and a half per 36. Again, I don't think that you continue seeing a 55 to 58% assist percentage without Murray for Jokic, but I do think it increases from the 40 or so percent that it's been at for the season. So you're just getting an even better Jokic, and that's not even factoring in that there's more usage available without Jamal Murray as well.
Okay. We know where we stand on Jokic, and we know where the field stands on Jokic right now. Our ownership has him at 26%. And then it trickles down to guys like Porter, Monte Morris, who you mentioned being someone that, you could use over a Brad Wanamaker. So at a similar price point, might actually be the same price point. I forget what Wanamaker
Same price point.
It is the same. Yeah. Do you like Porter or Monte Morris today, or anyone else for that matter?
Yeah, I like kind of all the secondary guys on Denver just because the matchup is good. And I think the price points are reasonable. Porter is priced up above everyone other than Jokic, but he's averaged 1.16 DraftKings points as a starter without Murray this year compared to 1.06 DraftKings points when Murray's played. Usage rate jumps a couple of points for Porter, and he's averaging a little over 34 minutes per game in those games. So I think Porter comes with a high ceiling. Aaron Gordon, I don't think his average production changes all that much because he still has all these other guys to compete with. Jokic just does so much in terms of playmaking and usage. And then you have Porter, you have Morris, you have all these other guys. But I do think Murray being out increases Aaron Gordon's ceiling because we saw in Gordon's time with Orlando that he's very capable as a playmaker. He's capable of scoring and he's capable of rebounding. He can do it all.
He was their de facto point guard for a while when they were dealing with all those injuries.
Yeah, exactly. He's capable of doing it. It's just that he doesn't really need to on this team. But there's going to be some individual games where for one reason or another, Aaron Gordon takes on a bigger role in at least one of those areas. So even if on average, he's going to produce similarly as when Murray is out, I think the ceiling and the likelihood of Gordon having a game where he just breaks out is a lot higher with Jamal Murray out. So that makes him really interesting to me in tournaments. He's only 5,300 on FanDuel, which is really nice. Monte Morris played about 26 minutes last game as the starter, lost a couple minutes at the end to blowout. He's someone that you can definitely look to as a value. Will Barton, kind of last guy in for me as well. So Jokic, the clear priority for me. I would say Porter and Gordon are the next two guys, followed by Morris and Barton.
What type of per minute production do you see Monty Morris having with Jamal Murray gone?
Let me pull the deep dive back up. I had it this morning.
Because he's not working right now.
Yeah. He has started 4 games without Murray this year. He's averaged 0.88 DraftKings points per minute, 30.3 minutes per game.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah.
That's not bad at that price. Okay. And I wonder what Wanamaker's per minute. You might have even mentioned it. Is he another 0.8, 0.85 type guy?
Yes. Since joining Charlotte, he's a little bit higher. Where do you go? Yeah. So since joining Charlotte, he's at 0.86 DraftKings points per minute.
So pretty close. It's just we think Morris might get a few more minutes, I'm assuming.
Yeah. And the matchup, I think, is a little bit better.
Probably,
I mean, they're both good, but
yeah, no, I was going to say it's probably a lot bit better. Brooklyn's defense earlier in the season was just a nut low. I mean, it was as bad as it could possibly be. They've at least made improvements to the point where every game doesn't have a total of 280 points in regulation.
Yeah, I mean, Denver has a implied total 13 points higher than Charlotte does.
Than Charlotte, exactly. Yeah, right. They're going to score points too. There's a lot more ball to go around, or a lot less. I guess a lot more mouths to feed would be a more appropriate way to say it. So that kind of sucks. Maybe Brad Wanamaker has an easier time getting the rock, but it's tough to say. And his minutes under Borrego are really tough to predict. When it comes to the Rockets, oh, by the way, if you were looking for any news, Thomas Satoransky was probable. He's now questionable. Does that mean a single thing to you today?
Yeah, actually, because
of Levine, right?
Yeah. I mean, we can just hit on that when we get to that.
Let's wait till for some reason I thought we got to that game already, but we didn't.
Bertans is out too.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Satoransky, I always still assume that he's with the Wizards.
Yeah, he'd be their third best player.
Yeah, he would. But that's pretty significant with Levine and COVID protocol. So we'll get to that one, I think, actually next. Yeah, perfect timing. We'll do our Hall of Fame segment first. DeAndre Bembry now listed as probable. Okay, so we're getting some news rolling in. Hopefully we'll get more. And if we don't, stick around after the show, live before lock. Coming up, Chris Spags, Greg Ehrenberg taking you all the way up till 7:30 Eastern time. Nope, that's wrong. 7 Eastern for lock. Houston Rockets. Do we look towards Christian Wood? Do we go to John Wall? Kevin Porter's played 40-plus minutes in regulation in back-to-back games. Huge playing time for him right now. Where are you going with the Rockets?
Nothing really stands out to me. I think if I go to the Rockets, I'm looking primarily at Christian Wood and John Wall, just because they both produce at a high rate, and they're both guys that, they're not cheap, but they play enough minutes and they produce at a high enough rate that they do have very high ceilings. It's just that on this particular slate, there's so many plays really in every single price range that I think are drastically underpriced, that it's going to be difficult to get to either of Wood or Wall with any sort of frequency. But, I wouldn't be upset about getting to either one. You could make the same argument for Porter, like you said, based on playing time. But overall, it's just a really difficult matchup, I think, against Denver on a slate where there's a lot of plays that I really want.
Anything else then, or you want to move on?
No, I think it's one of the least appealing teams on the slate.
Okay, interesting. Let's first hit on the Hall of Fame. We've been doing this for the past couple of days. It's going to be a staple of the shows going forward. We want you guys to have your wins up on the screen so we can show them off. And the one simple way to do it, download the avatar for Awesemo. Of course, it helps us, but it helps you in a big way too, because if you place top 3 in any tournament with 5,000 or more entries, not only do you show up here, you'll actually show up here even if you don't. If you take, if you're first, second, third, you have a good finish, even if it's quarter arcade, doesn't matter. You have a nice finish, we'll put you up here. We'll show it off. But if you finish top 3 in a 5,000 entry or more contest, you'll also get a free month of Awesemo Plus, all access, everything on the site. It's like a $9,900 value. You're already going to win money, and on top of that, you're going to get that as well. So if you're looking at the screen, we've got our boy El Negro Loco with one. I think I missed one, Chris. Can we go back to the first one? Because I thought we had a pretty solid win here that popped up. And yes, we're putting up new ones every single day. This is the first one? Okay. All right, our boy El Negro Loco, 3rd place. Gotta love it. A little baseball action there. Usually hang out in the low dollar stuff and decided to try something different today. Laffy, Jake, great job with the morning show. I wasn't on that. Maybe that's an old one. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think I haven't done a baseball show all season, but still pretty cool. 3rd place. What else do we have up here? I can't read some of these. Oh, El Bandito Gordo, 3rd place. Engelman and Lavi D talked me into the 9 for 9. Know nothing about baseball. Literally just use Baseball Suite. Third out of 240,000. That's awesome. What else do we have? Let's see here. Oh, this is the one I was looking for. Okay, this is what I was looking for. We're a bit of a delay. Jay Whalen had first and second place in this. Maxed out the mini max, the 12K mini max, and took down first and second place last night. Absolutely huge stuff. You have to love it. Get your name up here. Download the avatar. Tweet at us, at me, at Lafayette_D, at Awesemo Hall of Fame. We'd love to put you up here. And if you want to get access to these tools, awesemo.com/join. Ownership projections, player projections, top stack tool, everything we have to offer. The lineup builder, the fantasy cruncher add-on, the boomer bust tool, the optimal lineups tool, you name it. We've got it all built by and used by the #1 ranked player in the world, Alex Baker himself. And of course, we've got amazing guys behind the scenes working on these tools every day. Steve Buzzard, who's a Millie Maker winner, multiple $100,000 wins. Sean Zahn, Sean Zahn, that's a tough one, who has just absolutely had an amazing time playing DFS as well. An amazing, track record, of course. And then Tom Kennedy, CEO of Awesemo, Eddie behind the scenes. We got everyone working on these tools and just pumping out great stuff every day. So go to awesemo.com/join. Check it out. You want to do a weekly, monthly, annual, doesn't matter. Got something for everyone. And if you're a UFC fan, we're not doing the weekly promos anymore. If you use the promo code UFC 261, all one word, you get 50% off the entire month. Josh made a point. Listen up. This is important. Josh made a point this morning on the strategy show. It's very, very, very infrequent that he makes a point. So pay attention that if you were to do it today, or even, leading up to this upcoming week, you'd not only get the Usman Masvidal fight, which is a huge fight, awesome card, but you're going to get another great one for this week coming tomorrow. And then because you get the month, next month's pay-per-view fight lands on the 16th or something. So you'd also be included for that. So you get half off the month using UFC 261, getting 2 pay-per-view fights included in that. Very, very, very rarely are you going to have something like that where you've got or you got half off for 2 pay-per-views and all of the other fights happening throughout the month. So UFC 251, go to awesemo.com/promos to make that life a little bit easier on yourself and just click the button. All right. I've talked enough. Memphis and Chicago. The Grizzlies are 4-point favorites, 220.5 total. Before we get into this Chicago news, which is pretty significant, tell me if there's anything you like from the Grizz.
Nothing in particular. The normal, John Morant and Jonas Valanciunas have high ceilings stuff, but that, everybody knows that. There's nothing special about this spot, I don't think. Brandon Clark is questionable. There's 2 things to touch on there. One, if he plays, he's not a priority, but he is someone that you can look to in tournaments just as a contrarian play that is a little bit cheaper than he should be, I think. If he's out, it's a bump for Kyle Anderson, who, again, I don't think becomes a priority in the context of the entire slate, but we've seen Kyle Anderson play much better when he's getting all of his minutes at the 4. He gets more minutes when Clark is out as well. So it would be a bump for Kyle Anderson if Brandon Clark sits.
Okay. I'm a Tulsa Dog says, Laffy, this is a super chat. Is it true you used to sell Nancy Pelosi and Al Sharpton posters at GOP conventions and bank like a mofo, or is that interwebs hyperbole? That's hyperbole, but I get where you're going with that, and I can appreciate the sentiment. Do you want to go to the Chicago Bulls, or do you want to hit on anything else for Memphis?
Yeah, I think Chicago's got a lot more to talk about.
So I'm thinking right now with Levine out for a number of games, he's just been putting up huge numbers recently. With him out for a number of games, and okay, Lonzo Ball's starting. With him out for a bunch of games and Thomas Satoransky going from probable to questionable, if Satoransky sits, given that Levine is already out, those are 2 guys that are reasonably high priced given their production. Does Kobe White become a fantastic value option? Do you consider a near minimum salary Ryan Arcidiacono? Like, what do you do if Satoransky doesn't play tonight?
So I'll start it by saying the Bulls scare me because this is a team that has, even with Levine out and if Satoransky sits, a lot of bodies that they're willing to play. In their most recent game against Orlando, 12 different guys played at least 4 minutes of like normal non-garbage time run. So there's a lot of bodies here. And that was with, Arcidiacono not playing. So that being said, though, I think the logical thing you would expect is that Kobe White gets a lot more run. He's kind of taken a back seat recently, but if you take, with Levine out, that's 34 plus minutes. If Satoransky sits, you're talking another 28 to 30 minutes that's gone. It would only make sense for Kobe White to get more run, and he's reasonably priced, especially at 5K on DraftKings. So I'd look to Kobe White. It's just that Chicago is a team that still scares me because of how deep of a rotation they're running right now.
Yeah, it definitely concerns me as well. And I don't know if there's anyone that's really going to stand out that much. Let's for a second just operate under the assumption that Satoransky does sit. What would Kobe White's ownership have to look like for you to come in overweight on him?
My guess, and this is just total feel, is that his ownership would end up getting up to, like, on this slate, like 12 to 15%, like somewhere in there. In which case, like, I think that's probably where he should be, because so if Satoransky sits, I don't know that, like, Kobe White's in a very similar situation to, let's say, Cole Anthony, right? There's not a drastic difference there. Kobe White this year without Levine on the floor has averaged 0.9 DraftKings points per minute. He's going to get more opportunities and more minutes, but he's not going to just morph into a fantastic player. Cole Anthony has, produced at a higher rate than that. So I think they're really similar. And then you just have, all the guys from the Pistons. You have guys from Oklahoma City in that price range as well. You have Malachi Flynn. There's a lot of guys here that you can still look to. So I think you'd probably get 12 to 15% ownership on White. I think that's probably where I would expect to come in, somewhere in there.
Well, do I have news for you? Paul George, a game time decision.
I love the Clippers. And you already saw Kawhi was out, right?
What's that?
And you already saw Kawhi is out, right?
Oh, wait, is he?
Yeah.
When did we get that? I must have just missed it.
Yeah, I don't know. You were talking.
Oh, that's not surprising. Okay, so are you? Do you mean to tell me that we might go from having both of them to neither of them?
Yeah, and I mean that's without Marcus Morris being scratched after the game starts.
Oh my God! Oh my God! All right, well, do we have to revisit this? I feel like we should probably circle back because this is kind of important, even though it's a bad matchup against Philly.
Yeah, because it's just going to throw more guys into that Cole Anthony, Kobe White range. Like, because now you have Reggie Jackson, now you have Terrence Mann. Marcus Morris, if he plays, is over a fantasy point per minute guy. I say if he plays because he's not on the injury report, but it's the Clippers. So if George sits, you're getting more production from Morris, you're getting more from Jackson. You're getting more from Luke Kennard, who's 4,700. The only thing is that the Clippers are pretty expensive at this point. Like they're not entirely priced for George and Kawhi to be out, but they're pretty close to it. So I still think mostly they end up looking like secondary options more so than priorities on this particular slate where you have a lot of value.
All right, fair enough. Then we've got three. What do we have? 3 games to go here. Anything else for Chicago you want to hit on?
Yeah.
I think Tice. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. The one thing I wanted to ask you about was Tice, who's played 27 minutes or more in 3 of each of his last 3 games and 4 of his last 5. Can we rely on that type of product or those type of minutes today? Because he's pretty cheap.
Yeah, I think he's underpriced, and I talked about it a bit in the deep dive where it's still concerning because the Bulls are running such a deep rotation, and even in the front court, you have Vooch, you have Tice, you have Markkanen, you have Thaddeus Young. Right now, Tice is getting priority over Lauri Markkanen. That can change at the drop of a hat, but that's been how it is. How it's been since he's gotten there. He's playing alongside Vooch, which was kind of surprising to me, but they've been doing it, and Tice has been playing well. So I don't really have any reason based on the way they've been running their rotations to think you're getting less than like 24 minutes from Tice. He certainly could play more since he's playing alongside Vooch and they're shorthanded. So I do think Tice is a little bit underpriced. He's another one. I mentioned earlier that there were several value centers available at power forward on FanDuel. Tice is another one of them coming in at 4K at power forward. He's a $3,700 center on DraftKings. I think he is a good play. And I was going to mention him, and I was going to mention Vooch, who he's someone that, even though it's a different position, so people might not really think about it if Satoransky's out. We know from his time in Orlando that Vooch can just do everything.
Take over, yeah.
Yeah, so you could very easily just see him, the entire offense running through Vooch here. He's 9,700 on DraftKings, and it's kind of tough, I think, because he is so close in salary to Embiid. He's relatively close to Jokic. Where I'd really be interested in Vooch is FanDuel at 9K, because you don't have all the value centers on FanDuel that you do on DraftKings because they're power forwards. So it's easier to pay up at center, and you do have a little bit bigger gap between the top tier center or the top couple of centers and Vooch. So Vooch is someone that I am interested in tournaments just because I think he could play a bigger role without Levine than people are expecting.
Yeah, even if Satoransky plays and has some ball handling responsibilities, who are the other truly high usage players on this team that you're worried about to begin with Levine off the floor?
Right. Yeah. And so far, he's averaged, Vooch, that is, has averaged 1.51 DraftKings points per minute without Levine on the floor. He's averaged 1.4 with him on the floor. The rates haven't been drastically different, but it's definitely a situation where, like, I think everyone will expect that Vooch does better without Levine, but we haven't really seen what that game actually looks like for the Bulls yet. He could be much, much better without Levine.
Miami and Minnesota, the Miami Heat in Minnesota facing an awful Timberwolves team, 221 total. Miami 6.5-point favorites. Jimmy Butler was questionable last game, ended up playing. Victor Oladipo is not playing on this road trip. There's nothing really to talk about here. We haven't really targeted Miami much outside of a little bit of Bam Adebayo exposure and sometimes Jimmy Butler, but when they get healthy, and this is a team that's been unhealthy all year long, whether it's COVID or just injury related, when they get healthy and you look at some of these salaries, it becomes far more difficult to get to them. I know it's a good spot against Minnesota, but we've already run through like 7 games here where there's so many quality options. It just feels like it's tough to get to Miami, at least with any frequency.
Yeah, like I'm more interested in Miami tonight than I have been in a while. And I think Butler and Bam in particular are at pretty good price points here. You know, Bam's down to 7,900 on FanDuel, 8,400 on DraftKings. Butler's 9,200 on both sites, and you have to roster 2 small forwards on FanDuel. So I really like both of those guys. I think it's a really good matchup. But like you were saying, there's just so many good options on this slate that I still wouldn't anticipate getting tons of either guy. You can certainly look to some cheap Kendrick Nunn, who should most likely be starting again, playing around 28 minutes. Hero's inexpensive as well, but they're just in that price range where there's like 25 different guys that look very similar to them.
Aggregate ownership on the Timberwolves is actually laughable today. Laughable. The highest projected owned Timberwolf on FanDuel and DraftKings, 2.6%. Do I need to say much more than that?
It has to be Towns, right?
Yeah, it's Towns tied with Edwards on DraftKings and then Edwards on FanDuel.
Yeah, and I mean, deservedly so. Like I didn't even mention Towns in the deep dive today. Normally I mention him, as he's not quite as good as Jokic and Embiid, but he's still really good. He on this slate, it's just like you're going to have low enough ownership on so many guys. If Joel Embiid is 5% owned, what's the point in playing Karl-Anthony Towns instead?
Right. Gary Trent's out. Van Vliet, Bembry in. All right. Any more news comes in, we'll let you know. Of course, tune into the Live Before Lock too. Spags and Greg got you up till 7, but I already told you that. I don't think we need to talk about anything more. We've got about 13 minutes to close out these final 2 games. Who knows? Maybe we won't even need it. Portland Trailblazers on the road in San Antonio, 235.5 total. Blazers favored by 2.5. Are we getting to Lillard or McCollum or anyone from the Blazers today that you like?
This is a really weird slate as far as like all of the appealing games are early on. Yeah, not really. I mean, I'm never going to tell anyone not to play Damian Lillard or CJ McCollum. They're both really, really good. They both play huge minutes. It's not a bad matchup against San Antonio. It's more so just how do you prioritize them? So I think that, kind of as contrarian plays, relatively low owned guys, you do get a very high ceiling from Lillard. You get a high ceiling from McCollum. Even Norman Powell at 4,800 playing huge, or 5,800 rather, playing, big minutes for Portland. I think these are all fine plays. They're just not, they don't stand out to me in the context of the entire slate as people that I would expect my night to be revolving around.
It's easy enough for me. Nothing else on Portland?
No. Yeah, I assume everyone watching just understands, like, Lillard can score a lot of points. McCollum can score a lot of points. But when you start trying to look at everyone in their price range and prioritize stuff, they just aren't going to do it as often as other alternatives.
What about on the flip side of this game with San Antonio? DeJounte Murray, DeMar DeRozan, Patty Mills has had a couple solid games recently as well. Can we target San Antonio on such a big slate?
I had some interest in DeRozan and Murray, but it just turns into such a stars and scrubs slate that I'm not really sure how easy it's going to be to get them into lineups because, if let's say I go DeRozan, Murray, or I could just go one of the 4K guys and a 10K guy, and you're going to just prefer that secondary route, I think, on this slate in most spots. But it is a good matchup. Portland, middle of the pack in pace over the last month, one of the least efficient defenses in the league. Murray averaging about 1.1 DraftKings points per minute without Aldridge and with DeRozan this year. DeRozan about close to 1.2 fantasy points per minute in those games. So I think both of DeJounte Murray and DeMar DeRozan are a little bit underpriced, but I don't think they're as underpriced as some other guys.
Okay, let's revisit Portland for a second because Dame's questionable. With Dame Lillard questionable, if he's out, CJ McCollum has played well. Of course, he was out for a while earlier in this season. His numbers have leveled off, expectedly so, but he's going to play a ton of minutes in a fast-paced, high-scoring game. We already have a lot of good options at pretty much every tier. But if we get news that Damian Lillard doesn't play, mind you, this is an 8:30 game, not a 10 p.m. game. It's towards the back of the slate. It's the 9th out of 10 games that we're touching on, but there isn't a single 10 Eastern game today. This is an 8:30. The next one's at 9:30. If Dame Lillard sits, CJ McCollum, even at 8K, seems like we'd have to be interested in him. And then you're going to have to get someone to shoulder the rest of the load. And a couple of the guys that we've seen in the past when Dame Lillard is out get a lot of that work, aren't really aren't getting minutes anymore. So who would come in and get that? Would we just see CJ shift to the 1 and then we'd fill in with some wing player? What are you thinking here?
Yeah, I mean, I think you would get, Simons in the rotation. You would get.
Yeah, he just hasn't played any minutes.
Right. I don't know that he would play enough that I'm really interested in him. I think that the spots I'd be most interested in, obviously McCollum, 1.43 DraftKings points per minute in 9 games without Lillard since the start of last season, 34.5% usage rate, 36% assist percentage. He'd be great, and I'd be doing whatever I can to late swap to McCollum. Powell would get a bump. Nurkic would get a bump in terms of production, but the minutes would still be an issue. I don't think that there would be anybody, especially when you consider the entire slate and how many cheap options there are. I don't think there's anybody from Portland that isn't already a main piece that I'd be looking to get to.
All right.
But I would love McCollum.
Gene B. Camp. Yeah. What would it change your opinion on anybody else that might not be directly influenced from a minute standpoint, but from a usage perspective?
I would like Norman Powell a little bit more than I do.
Okay.
But McCollum's the one where it would take him from what I think is just sort of a neutral play on the slate to one of my favorite plays. The problem is that because, and you mentioned it, there's not a lot of, there's not late games. So I don't want to build lineups that rely on Lillard being out and then get stuck with, McCollum or Powell with him in, because there's not a whole lot that I'm able to swap to. There's not a lot of guys on the Knicks I love. There's not a lot of guys on Dallas I love. So it's going to put you in a really tough situation, I think, if you go the route of like play McCollum and then late swap. You're going to, or play Lillard and then late swap. Like you're going to end up in some weird spots if you do that.
All right. Gene B. Kim says, favorite Pink Floyd song? Trash band. Who listens to them?
I couldn't name a song.
No, I love them. Have a Cigar is my favorite Pink Floyd song. Also, though, When You're In from Obscured by Clouds. It's the second track on there. You got to start with track 1. It fades into it. It's purely instrumental, but it's amazing. And if we're going mainstream here, Comfortably Numb's second guitar solo is one of the best guitar solos ever made. So good question, Gene. I'll talk about music all day long. Anything from San Antonio else that you want to get to before we close this one out?
No, Murray and DeRozan, all that I really see there.
All right. And we had a question from Lillard Time in the super chat. What chalk would you eat in a medium dollar tournament on FanDuel? 2K-ish players, 2K-ish entries, I'm assuming. Do you eat more chalk on smaller field tournaments? I guess he's trying to get an idea of what type of build you suggest for certain type of fields and certain type of entries.
Yeah. So in general, the smaller the field, the chalkier you can be. Especially if you're talking smaller field, like lower or medium stakes tournaments, you kind of if you're playing higher stakes small fields, you start having to balance it because guys that are 40% in mid stakes or 80% at high stakes, and so the math equation changes. But yeah, you definitely can get away with he in this example a 2,000 person tournament. You should be playing it differently than a 50,000 person tournament. You just don't need to be as different. If someone's 20% owned in a 2,000 person tournament, you're not competing with nearly as many lineups to have that guy as if he's 20% owned in a larger field. So yeah, it's just, the ownership just becomes a little bit less important in smaller field stuff.
Steve says, it bothers me when there's 2K people here and these dudes only get 200 likes. They deserve better. Thanks, Steve. I think so too, but I'm so tired. I've gotten like 9 hours of sleep combined the past 3 days that the energy to even ask for likes as I usually do is left my body. I don't have it in me. So if you'd be kind enough, it would be great, and hit that subscribe button because it really helps us out a ton. You guys know this, like the algorithm on YouTube is wild and it favors, if any of you guys have channels or you watch other channels, you know, so many of them will say the same thing. The algorithm's crazy. They favor the bigger ones where the ad money's going to, and the smaller channels don't really get the recommended as much. When you subscribe, it recommends it more. When you tell your friends about it, people that you know about our channel, it helps us a ton. So all of that stuff is hugely appreciated. And it goes, I'm telling you, it goes a much longer way than you might think. When you hit like, when you comment, when you subscribe, and of course, hit that notification bell. And if you want to join the channel, this has nothing to do with helping us or the algorithm or anything like that, but you can join it right under that. And you get the cool emojis, you get the badges. I think we're in the process making an Adam and a Josh emoji too. So that could be pretty fun. You got one of me, you got Ben, you got Alex, and a bunch of other fun stuff. And as the longer you're here, the badges go up and they look cooler. And I don't know, it's fun. In a crazy NFT world where that shit's selling for like 70 million, why not have some badges every day? All right, New York Knicks, Dallas Mavericks. The New York Knicks, without Alec Burks, Nerlens Noel questionable. That's about it for them. See if we got any news coming in here. I'm just trying to pay close attention to all of this now. We're good to go. Knicks on the road in Dallas are 6.5-point dogs, 211.5 total. Anything stick out to you from New York?
How incredibly slow this game's going to be played.
Yeah, it's not going to be fun.
Burks being out is sort of interesting, probably more so for like a late slate than anything. It could open up more minutes for either Derrick Rose or for Quickly, but as far as the main slate goes, I don't feel confident enough looking to either of those guys because we don't know exactly how that rotation is going to look. You could also just get more minutes for Bullock as well. So there's nothing really, I don't think. Derrick Rose is okay. Julius Randle, never going to say not to roster him, but I would lean towards Zion for 400 more on DraftKings against the Wizards as opposed to Randle here. Dallas 29th in pace over the last month. The Knicks 26th. Not a game that I expect to be very conducive to fantasy points.
Super chat from Mike B. Philly guy, Philli. Might not know basketball, but he knows a good solo when he hears one. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Yeah, Philly guy. I haven't heard from that guy since. Waiting for an email. Do you want to wrap this up with the Dallas Mavericks?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to take much longer than the Knicks.
I can't imagine it is, but I'm going to ask you to take approximately 2 minutes and 45 seconds starting now.
Dude, I cannot say Luka Doncic's name that slowly. Yeah, I mean, Luka is, I think, clearly the number one guy from Dallas here. The Knicks are the second most efficient defense over the last month. Like I just said, they played a crawling pace, but Luka is essentially matchup proof. I'm more concerned about the pace than the defensive efficiency because that makes more of an impact on Luka, I think, than the Knicks actually really being able to stop him. The thing with Luka is just that ownership is low enough on some of the other pay up options that it kind of lowers my interest in him. Like I'd feel differently if Embiid were getting more ownership or something like that. But right now you're getting like 12% ownership projected to Luka. I think that's more or less where it should be, like 26% to Westbrook, but in a much more appealing spot. Jokic in a much more appealing spot. So it kind of just comes down to, if you get Luka into some lineups, that's fine. If you're playing 150 lineups, you probably should have some Luka just because it would be kind of crazy not to, because the ceiling's so high. But in terms of trying to put it in the context and the chances of his success versus some other guys, I don't think it's as high. I think he's probably maybe a little bit easier to get to on FanDuel because you do have $1,000 difference between him and Westbrook. On DraftKings, you only have the $200 difference. So it makes it even more difficult, I think.
All right. You didn't quite get there, but I forgive you. 10 up, 10 down. We're handing it over to Spags. We're handing it over to Greg right after this, all the way up till 7. But before we do, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but whenever we have an extra minute, I think people enjoy hearing this. It gives them a little bit of clarity and context for someone that might not have been able to catch the entire show. I'm going to ask you for your favorite pay up and your favorite value option for tonight's slate.
Oh, sorry. I thought I was done.
No. Listen, you don't fill the time. You're going to have to fill it somehow. We never don't fill time.
Well,
hey,
I thought you were. When you started, I thought you were going into an ad read, so I just stopped listening, and then I heard favorite value and favorite payup.
I never do ad reads. Go ahead.
Yeah. So favorite payup is Jokic, just ahead of Westbrook. I think it's really close. Favorite value is God. There's so many. I really don't. Isaiah Stewart, I guess.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you guys watching. As always, you know where to find us every single day of the week. Adam, what's your favorite mid-range play? No, you're good. I was trying to catch you off guard.
Yeah, no, I was listening that time.
All right.
But I guess, like, does Beal count?
Sure. McCollum if Lillard's out, right?
Yeah.
Well, pay attention to that news. We got you coming up live before lock. Strategy show every day of the week. Deeper dive live before lock every day of the week. PGA content. Pete Rogers and Jason Floyd tomorrow with the pay-per-view show. Going to be awesome. You got to stick around for that. That's UFC, not NBA, but UFC. We got MLB all throughout the day. But, yeah, I did want to promote that just before we left. UFC 261 gets you half off an entire month of MMA DFS content, everything we have, the ownership, player projections, the top fighter tool, you name it, all of that half off for the entire month. And that includes 2 different pay-per-views that are going to be in that. UFC Live Before Lock with Jason Floyd, Pete Rogers is tomorrow at 4 p.m. Don't miss that one. And don't miss Live Before Lock coming up right now. We'll catch you back here next time.
Yeah. Sure. No, if I thought we weren't live, I would have been saying way more egregious things before during that during that couple minutes.
We've just been bullying Eric even more than I do on here. I think now is the time, though. I'm going to go the other way and just start being extra nice. Yeah,
I mean, Eric's my friend, and I'm making a point to hammer that home because I do wonder like how many of the people in the YouTube chat just assume we all hate each other.
Oh yeah, well like I felt that sometimes too, when it was like you and Josh doing shows, and it's like, oh, like I like Greg and Josh, but then they'll bust my balls, and there'd be people in the chat who are like, oh, they hate Spags. It's like I've known Josh longer than anybody else at this company, and we've generally enjoyed each other's company, and that's people don't get the bits. People don't get the bits.
No, I mean now we're live, so people are gonna, well, at least the mic's live, so people are gonna figure it out. Yeah, I kind of prefer if people just think we all hate each other though.
That's true. Very catty. I'm always tearing up people's clothes in the dressing room that we don't share.
Isn't it weird though how many radio shows the hosts don't like each other? With like, like Opie and Anthony, Mike and Mad Dog. It seems like 90% of radio shows that get popular, nobody on the show likes each other.
Yeah, I used to love Opie and Anthony, and it made me sad when it made me sad when Anthony became a gigantic racist and everything was like about that. But then second of all, it was like, oh, they were just pals. They always seemed like pals on the air, and it's like, yeah, they do hate each other. Mike and the Mad Dog, you could see, because there was always those awkward pauses.
Well, Frances is also so unlikable.
Yeah, I mean, he got that second wind of renaissance, I feel like, of people being into him again,
but it was only because it was so bad.
Yeah, there's a charm to it. I feel like the cadence is like, that was one thing I liked about Josh's stream before he even started working at Awesemo. I'd seen him through Reddit or whatever, and he would like sip his coffee. Now, like, it would be terrible, but it was just like, it's peaceful, like hearing somebody go just slurping and being quiet. And I don't know. I'm a simple man. Yeah,
I could say that listening to people eat and drink on the air, usually not something I'm like, oh, that's why I like this show. Although that reminds me of, by the way, did we start yet? Or is the show, I mean, I know the mic's on. Is this our
hanging out.
Oh, we got 20 seconds. That is a funny bit they used to do on Opie and Anthony, where they used to have people bring in food and they would just eat food on the air because it would just make the listeners really upset. So they just started doing it all the time.
Yeah, I remember Opie used to do that a lot. Opie follows me on Twitter. Fun fact, it has for years. Yeah. All right. What is up, guys? We are here for the home stretch, the Awesemo NBA Live Before Lock show. About 55 minutes left until this slate locks on DraftKings, FanDuel, everywhere else you're going to be playing today. I'm Chris Spags, joined by a man who you just heard me talking about the joys, the hits of New York Shock Jock Radio with. He's Nerd-Ass Greg Ehrenberg. How you doing, Greg? I kind of rushed your name there. I feel bad. Nerd-Ass Greg Ehrenberg.
Yeah, it's so the other day, Pete McCarthy called me a Greg Ehrenberger, which now that's all Jordan calls me when he texts me. I think he's also been posted in the YouTube chat a few times, calling me Ehrenberger. But yeah, worse things have happened than my name being said wrong.
There are worse things that could happen, like not taking advantage of some of the deals that we have going right now at Awesemo.com. And you just heard some of the talk about the MMA deal that we have going for the UFC show that's coming up here. Obviously, some great content with Jason Floyd and Pete the Heat that always comes up. You get access to all the great Awesemo Plus tools and content for really every sport, or nearly every sport, I guess is what we're claiming, but it's really every sport out there with the Awesemo Plus weekly pass for $29.95. We also have that promo code going, UFC 261, in honor of Usman Masvidal, coming up on April 24th. You get 50% off your first month of Awesemo Plus MMA when you use the promo code UFC 261. That's $14.98 for 30 days of Awesemo Plus MMA projections, which includes our fighter projections, ownership projections, and the Top Fighters tool, which is going to be similar to the Boom Bust tool, the Top Stacks tool. If you're using the other sports tools, you'll know it. You'll see it on there. Make sure to go check out that promo code right now, UFC 261 at Awesemo.com/join. And of course, hit that like button and subscribe here. If it's me on a Live Before Lock show, we'll be doing a little something I call money time at the halfway point of the show, giving away the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel for free. So make sure to hit that like button now. Smash it if you can. This is going to be one slate where I guarantee you are going to want to know the top 5 owned plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. And of course, if you don't want to be subject to the whims of your peers hitting the like button or me flipping a hat, you can also go to Awesemo.com/join. Get those ownership projections in your life right now. Is the biggest advantage you can get for yourself in NBA DFS. Greg, we got some news that we're waiting on here. We were talking before the show. Damian Lillard, questionable. I think you're treating him as though he's out. Paul George, also questionable now in a game time decision. Hopefully we'll have that news not too long down the show here, because that's a big one for the Clippers that could change around a lot of things with Kawhi already ruled out. But how are you handling things now? I just hinted at it, but tell me how you're handling both the Paul George news and the Damian Lillard news.
Yeah, so the Damian Lillard one is actually a little bit more crucial to guess correctly, because that game starts at 8:30 p.m. Eastern time, and that is the second latest start time of any game on the slate. The Paul George news, whether you guess it right or wrong, isn't really all that significant because it's one of the first games of the slate. So presumably we're going to know whether he's in or out before the slate starts, and we can just adjust accordingly. The Damian Lillard one, though, I have him marked out right now, so I'm getting to CJ McCollum at a decent clip. He's in about a quarter of my lineups. Jusuf Nurkic gets a little bit of a bump, but still doesn't make it into my player pool as a center option because his minutes are still a little bit limited. And then I also have a little bit of exposure to Norman Powell. He's in a few of my lineups. But to me, if Damian Lillard is out, CJ McCollum becomes one of the best plays on the slate. But where this is really tricky is if Damian Lillard ends up playing, I would want nothing to do with CJ McCollum except I have him in my player pool right now, and I kind of fear that there's a chance that I'll go into the that game with unknowing whether Damian Lillard's in or out, and I'm just basically flipping a coin and guessing now. But given the way that he was downgraded in the middle of the day, my feel in this situation that he's going to get ruled out, I could certainly end up being wrong, but that's where I stand right now.
Yeah, so and Greg and I were talking again before the show, I think before our mics were turned on, about some of my struggles yesterday with Dennis Schroeder, where he, to me, looked like one of the best players on the slate. Then he got downgraded as to be unlikely to play, according to Frank Vogel. So I recrunched my lineups after the slate had already started and went through them again when it turned out that Dennis Schroeder was going to play. So basically 3 optimizations for the same guy, and ended up being a guy who was terrible anyway, had a bad day with whatever infection in his foot and all that. And I'm a little more leery of playing this straight. And I think what Greg is talking about is going to be a key decision point for you guys out there today, where this Portland game, second to last one on the slate, starts at 8:30 Eastern time. It's kind of a weird start time today for all these games, where the last game on the slate today is going to be New York and Dallas at 9:30 Eastern time. And there's not a lot you can pivot to over there. So I guess to play the devil's advocate a little to your take, Greg, where you are treating Damian Lillard as to go and be out, how would you handle this if you're not, you're not compelled, you're not feeling comfortable treating CJ McCollum as a quality play right now, or a better play like you would be if Lillard were out? Because you are going to be passing up, or at least theoretically passing up, guys like Fred VanVleet, guys like Terry Rozier, guys who are very comparably priced. And I would agree that McCollum is one of the better plays if you do get Lillard out, but I don't know if I'm ready to take that risk. So if you are like me and you're afraid to take that risk, I guess, how would you approach it? Is there any way at all you could see yourself getting to McCollum if you don't make that way for him now?
No, if Damian Lillard's in, I wouldn't be getting to McCollum. And it's where his price is at right now is kind of fair to a little bit too high to me if Damian Lillard's in. But then you take him out, and then like I do all of a sudden, then without Lillard, then McCollum's all of a sudden a guy who I project to score somewhere, around 45 fantasy points and becomes one of the top plays on the slate. So yeah, to your point, if you're totally unsure of the situation or you don't want to take that risk, you don't have to play CJ McCollum. And there are a lot of other strong shooting guard plays to your point in that price range. Like I think that Fred VanVleet is somewhat of a comparable play, even if Damian Lillard was to be ruled out, just because everybody's out for the Raptors right now, other than Fred VanVleet. But that's also right now showing up in the ownership, where Fred VanVleet is picking up way more significant ownership than CJ McCollum. So I like that McCollum comes at a little bit of an ownership discount right now. So maybe if he ends up getting really popular before we get Damian Lillard news, then maybe I would change my tune. But right now he's so low owned that I think that it makes a lot of sense.
Definitely a risky tournament approach, I would say, by Greg. But if you have the confidence, I guess, and are willing, as always we say here, it's your money at the end of the day. So if you're willing to take the risk on and the chance of a bigger payday here, I think that's not a crazy thing to do at all. I just think for me, especially after the jerking around yesterday, I will be erring on the side of caution and the chance later that Lillard could play, and probably be taking some more plays from the early games that I'm comfortable with. We got a couple super chats to hit on real fast up top here. Just a nice one from Art by Rojas saying, thanks for your time, guys. We appreciate that. I think Art by Rojas, also an Awesemo member, if I'm remembering correctly, here on the YouTube channel. You can also support the channel by however you want, really, by the super chats on here. You can also click that join button underneath the video. You can find the desktop version there. You can get yourself a little avatar, get yourself some special emojis, including a money time one, Lofty ones, Alex ones, a whole bunch of fun things on there. So join the channel for yourself, and we appreciate the super chats a bunch. Another super chat from Soul Dope saying, forget winning a GPP. I'm waiting on the day where I can go out to a bar with Adam, Lofty, Josh, Greg, and Spags. Also, thanks for the help. I play 1 to 3 lineups on FanDuel, and I've made over 7K this week. It's good news to hear from Soul Dope. But Greg, I hear you'd have to be the DD in that situation, right? Where Lofty, Josh, and I could be getting wrecked all day. Adam, of course, would be getting wrecked regardless whether he was driving or not. I think we all know that. But you, Greg, you'd have to take care of us all and Soul Dope in this one super chat scenario.
Yeah, I guess so, because I don't drink. So there we go. I'll be everybody's designated driver. I don't know where we're meeting. We all live in way different parts of the country all over, but maybe just be a neutral place that's, not related, like Hawaii or something like that.
We're meeting in Chicago, obviously, the Awesemo headquarters. We'll all be waiting outside, and that's where it all comes together in these theoretical fun scenarios that will never happen, I'd say, for the most part. One more super chat from Orion saying, top 3 must-haves or core pieces for a FanDuel GPP. This is getting right to the meat of things right away, Greg, but if you had to give somebody 3 core plays on FanDuel, I am not playing today because we're doing this show, but who would be your 3 FanDuel plays? And I guess I can do them for DraftKings. I don't know, whatever.
All right. So as of right now, it would be Isaiah Stewart, CJ McCollum, and Chris Boucher. And CJ McCollum's obviously pending the news that I'm assuming Damian Lillard will be out. Fred VanVleet also pretty close to me, pretty close for me. But right now, since I assume that Dame is out and CJ McCollum at the ownership discount.
Yeah, I think that seems reasonable for me on DraftKings. The one core play, and I guess this is where we could start the show, a value play that I am finding very difficult to avoid. And I have really, I wouldn't say the utmost confidence in, whatever the opposite of the utmost confidence in, the nutmost confidence in. Caleb Martin is popping up for me a lot as a value play today on DraftKings because of the price point, because of the line of construction that lets me get. And I guess the question I would have for you, Greg, and this would be somebody I would offer up on DK if you want to ride along with me in a good portion of the field, about a quarter of the field going to Caleb Martin on DraftKings. And I guess the same thing on FanDuel too. Is there a value play like Caleb Martin or Caleb Martin himself that's really jumping out to you in a way that you wouldn't have expected starting the day?
I guess all of the Pistons guys, just because, I mean, but I couldn't really say it's unexpected either, but like my 4 most rostered players right now on DraftKings are Josh Jackson, Isaiah Stewart, Sadiq Bey, and Killian Hayes. Also, I'm assuming Hamidou Diallo, who's currently listed as questionable. I don't expect him to play today. I think he's ultimately going to be ruled out. So the Pistons, I'm expecting to be extremely shorthanded. That comes in addition to, just so I don't forget, I'm going to bring up their injury report right now. But off the top of my head, Mason Plumlee's resting today. Jeremy Grant, he just came back from injury. He's resting today. Wayne Ellington is out. Corey Joseph is out. Rodney Magruder is out. Dennis Smith Jr. is out. So we're looking at a really, and by the way, Hamidou Diallo is officially questionable, but just for the sake of me trying to set up minutes here, I ruled him as out. So that leaves the Pistons with very, very few active bodies, and the whole team is really cheap. And usually we look at this and be like, okay, well, surely this is a game with blowout risk. Not so fast. They're playing against the Oklahoma City Thunder, doing the same exact thing on the other side. So we just have a bunch of really cheap guys on the Pistons that I expect to play a whole bunch of minutes in a competitive game. So I'm very, very heavy on the Pistons.
Yeah, this was something we talked about in the tip-off earlier with Ben Rasa and, of course, our girl Kayla, who was there every day for weird comments that you want to throw on YouTube, but also for keeping that show on the straight and narrow. Whenever I'm on, there's a decent chance that it doesn't stay on the straight and narrow. So we need somebody there to help us out. So make sure you're watching that on a Monday to Friday basis. But I'm with you on Detroit, and I think one thing that she took offense to that I think is what you said that's really important here is that Oklahoma City is also a very bad team. This isn't Detroit playing, Toronto a couple weeks ago, where Toronto's now, I think, we're sort of universally regarding as a not great team. But Detroit fought into that game and kept it going. And it was sort of, they were hitting a lot of 3-pointers to keep the variance on their side. And in a way that worked for them, they won that game. But this is now them playing against one of their peers, playing against another really bad team where they don't have to do anything crazy. They don't have to have an outlier 3-point day. Like, they just have to exist to keep this game close. And I guess the question I would have for you, Greg, especially if you're assuming that Diallo is going to be out, how many Pistons are too many? Because I do normally have a max 3 from any team rule. I think that's what the longer term studies have said about winning lineups and GPPs for the most part. But Adam mentioned on the deeper dive that 4 guys were appearing in the optimal lineup that are Pistons today. So are you comfortable getting to 4 or I guess even 5? Because you could sort of make a case for, I think, really every single guy who's in the rotation today.
I have absolutely no issue with 4 Pistons. And it's because these guys are so cheap. So it's not your standard type of situation where a lot of times, somebody will get ruled out or a few guys will get ruled out and open up a bunch of usage, but still, there'll be things like, hey, one of the guys is 7,400, one of the guys is 6,800. Josh Jackson on DraftKings is 5,300. He's the most expensive of those guys I mentioned. Isaiah Stewart, 4,400. Sadiq Bey, 4,800. Killian Hayes, 3,500. If these guys are all going to score between 25 and 30 DraftKings points, which is a very reasonable expectation, we don't need them to do anything absurd at these price points, then a bunch of them could easily pay off their salaries. I don't think I have any lineups with 5 Pistons, but I definitely have ones with 4.
Yeah, I think I'm going to be willing to get to 4 on them today just because there are a lot of guys who project well and just, not a lot of blowout risk. Certainly any game could blow out, but this is a game that has a 3-point spread actually favoring Detroit at home. So in the spot, it's hard to imagine these guys getting blown out off the court, or at least if you're playing it the way that we normally do, which is using the Vegas totals as your guideline, that is going to be a spot where it's hard to get away from Detroit. I'm going to put you on the spot here. And I think this is one it's always tough to do the ranking thing because there's a million different ways it could go. But in terms of your priority for the Pistons, how would you rank these guys? And let's say on DraftKings first, because it is a different equation on FanDuel and DraftKings.
So Isaiah Stewart would be number 1, and that's pretty comfortably 1 for me. 2, This gets a little more. I have the next three guys are so close. It's Isaiah Stewart by himself, but I guess 2, I'd go Killian Hayes, 3, Josh Jackson, 4, Sadiq Bey. But it's really 1, Isaiah Stewart, and then 2A, 2B, and 2C.
How much is your previous, I'm going to ask you about your FanDuel take as well, but how much is your previous Killian Hayes bias factoring in? Because he's the guy that I think I'm most inclined to get under on, just because I don't think he's proven the ability to show a lot of fantasy upside. And I think Saben Lee at a slightly cheaper price point, intriguing. And I think there's a pathway for him to steal a few minutes as a fellow young player, certainly not without the draft capital invested in him. But is this guiding you at all? Because I know you were very bullish on Killian Hayes to start the year. Obviously, he got hurt. That threw things off. But is this your redemption story here, or your redemption song, to quote Bob Marley, for Killian Hayes today? Are you buying in extra just to prove yourself right?
Not really. Although if you think about it this way, so I'm still bullish on Killian Hayes going forward. And I haven't seen enough from yet, right? Like, he's been hurt, and he's actually played reasonably well over the last week, but I haven't seen enough to change my opinion on him. So I can't even call it bias at this point. It's not like it's 3 years into his career and I'm just hanging on to Killian Hayes, who hasn't done anything. He's only played a handful of games in the NBA, and I still think he's a good prospect going forward. And I mean, if we look at his games over the last week, against the Oklahoma City Thunder, when he played 25 minutes, he scored 34 DraftKings points. Then against the Kings, 21 minutes, 19 DraftKings points. Bad game against the Blazers, 17 minutes, 9 DraftKings points. In last game, 25 minutes against the Clippers and scored 22 DraftKings points. And I think with all the guys out today, it's not unreasonable to think he plays somewhere in the neighborhood of 28 to 32 minutes. He's also extremely cheap on both FanDuel and DraftKings. But like I said, I don't really think it's bias. I just think it's somebody, I think here is somebody who's a good young prospect who's now stepping into more minutes. And I just like him as a prospect. But that doesn't necessarily have to mean bias, because I haven't seen enough to make it seem like I'm just totally off base with him.
No, that's fair. I just remember your early love for him and just wanted to circle it all back, because that's how it goes sometimes on these shows. And I do the same thing too, where I dig my heels in on guys sometimes, and you don't even realize it on a subconscious level. But I get it. I think Killian Hayes, projected for 29 minutes from Awesemo. I think he certainly is going to be in play. I would personally want to favor Saben Lee, just because I think Killian Hayes hasn't proven, I think, as Greg was just saying. And I think Saben Lee has proven it a little bit more. And it wouldn't shock me to see him come off the bench and just sort of seize the role and see some minutes down the stretch. But definitely both guys have room to be productive here. For DraftKings, just to give my rankings, just to close this loop here before we talk about FanDuel's equation real fast with Detroit. I actually think Sadiq Bey would be higher for me. Isaiah Stewart's still my number 1. Bey would be my number 2, because he sort of has played a very, the generic brand version of Jeremy Grant when Jeremy Grant's been out. Even sometimes when Jeremy Grant has played, you've seen Grant's upside be limited by Bey having decent days. And I do think Bey, to me, at 4,800 on DK, he's a mid-tier or mid-priced value play that I feel like can pay off. So he's higher to me than everybody else besides Josh Jackson and Isaiah Stewart. But I think that's my top 3. On FanDuel, though, Greg, you do have Isaiah Stewart playing a different position. So I think he's probably still number 1 on there too. But what would be your FanDuel rankings or priority for Detroit?
By the way, before we go on, I have to, we got a very good super chat from Gene BK, who asked, how much do you think Eric got paid for voicing Cedric the Owl?
If you missed that clip earlier, old Awesemo, Alex Baker himself at Awesemo DFS tweeted a fun video from an RPG that honestly I'd never even heard of, that sounds eerily like my Eric Lindquist impression, that comes from only the utmost respect, again, to say the word utmost more times on the show, for Eric Lindquist. But yeah, if ever there were an impression that sounded like an RPG owl that also still sounded like the original person, I think that one definitely hit it on the nose.
Yeah, and actually, I think the question Gene has is wrong, because he asked, how much do you think Eric got paid for voicing Cedric the Owl? I think that Eric paid handsomely to play the role of that character. I think he unloaded his savings account just so that he could, well, then it would have been his piggy bank, because I assume that game came out many years ago. I have no clue, though. But yeah, Eric paid handsomely to get that role.
Sure. Eric is an actor and part of his time works. So that's certainly the break of a lifetime, playing an RPG owl who is afraid of poisonous creatures in the forest. But neither here nor there. We did get some news that it's important, and it's going to be one of those shows where the news, I am going to assume, is going to come out in intervals here. So make sure you are refreshing the projections on the Awesemo's projection page. And of course, hit that like button now, because we're going to be talking ownership in 7 minutes here, giving away the top 5 owned plays, and hopefully not stalling as much for time while we wait to figure out the important things that are going to decide the slate. But Tomas Satoransky Satoransky, one guy who was downgraded. So, Greg, here's your thesis earlier coming into play now. Satoransky ruled out today. Kobe White will start for Satoransky, and it's an interesting situation. Satoransky being out, Zach LaVine out for at least 10 days because presumably he got COVID or is a close contact, whatever it is. He's in the health protocols. You have now Nicholas Vucevic in the spot, and I think that's something that, going back to last year, Kobe White was a monster in some games without LaVine. But this year you have Vooch in there playing the Vooch role, probably taking up a lot of usage as he does every game, but certainly did a lot in Orlando. How are you feeling about Kobe White in the spot? Because he is another value-ish play who could theoretically have a lot of upside with two guys out now in the backcourt.
Yeah, so he is 5,000 on DraftKings, and Kobe White priced at all the way down at 3,800 on FanDuel. So something actually that I think becomes relevant now, talking about Kobe White on FanDuel, because we didn't do I didn't give out my rankings for the Pistons guys on FanDuel yet, but this is actually going to change Killian Hayes a little bit for me, because he's now the same exact price as Kobe White. And Kobe White to me is a far superior play on FanDuel at the same price to Killian Hayes. But really quick, just to hit on that, my favorite overall Piston is Isaiah Stewart on DraftKings, then Sadiq Bey, then Josh Jackson, and now Killian Hayes a distant fourth, because I think Kobe White becomes a pretty strong play. But anyway, talking about Kobe White, I think we can't expect him to have quite the same usage in the starting lineup that he had earlier in the year in games without Zach LaVine, just because there's Vucevic there. But even so, I mean, Kobe White has been somebody who's a pretty good fantasy producer when he's on the court. I assume he's going to have to play, fairly significant minutes. And I mean, still earlier in the season when he was a starter, I played 33 minutes per game, averaged 31 DraftKings points. We don't need that much from him because his price is so depressed from what it was earlier on both DK and FanDuel. So Kobe White looks like a really strong play to me right now.
Yeah, I'm going to wait to see the Awesemo minutes projection to get a full read on how I'm feeling about it. But I do think Kobe White, he has definitely taken the bumps in usage. NBA Wow was down for me earlier. That would give you guys some more specific numbers, but definitely takes bumps in usage and assist upside and court time historically without having Zach LaVine on the floor, and certainly Satoransky too. I guess the question I would have for you, Greg, talking about Chicago, is that are there just now too many guys? Because the deeper dive, Loughran and Adam were talking about it. They did play 12 guys in their last game, some chunk of minutes, and you have guys now like Troy Brown in the mix. Denzel Valentine was in the mix last year too, but still a guy who can get up some shots. Patrick Williams certainly has looked for his shot when there's been any sort of absentee bodies in the Chicago lineup. Is there any concern here that the Bulls are just running too deep now for Kobe White to have actual meaningful upside?
No, and also a lot of this is a price play, right? So if he was 6,500, then I would say, yeah, that's about a fair price. But now he's somebody who I'm going to project for slightly over 30 fantasy points. And FanDuel, you absolutely have to play Kobe White in cash, in my opinion. And DraftKings, I think he's a strong cash play, not a must roster guy, except I think still a very strong consideration for cash. But just looking at Kobe White right now and about to rerun my lineups, I assume that he is going to pop up pretty meaningfully for me.
And we just got news that Hamidou Diallo is active today. So that is one more body in Detroit rotation. I know that's going to be important for you, Greg. So if you want to make your swapsies there, now would be the time to do so.
Yep. Updating for the Bulls first, then I have to go back to the Pistons. Just all the fun of this point of the season. To your point before about the minutes potentially being capped for Kobe White because the Bulls are running a deep rotation, I agree with that to an extent, other than look at the active guys they have now and who's going to be handling the ball and playing point guard minutes when Kobe White isn't on the court. Like, look at the rest of the roster. I just don't know who else it is that would make me want to think that Kobe White doesn't play over 30 minutes.
It would be the Archie Diacono renaissance, I would think, along with Troy Brown getting some of the two-guard minutes more meaningfully would be how I think it gets congested. And that's sort of why I want to see what Awesemo takes on it, because I could fudge around with the numbers now and get a better read on it. And I think Kobe White's going to look playable if I just take, the Satoransky minutes away. But I think if you do have Archie Diacono suddenly getting 20 minutes, I think that does make it a little bit thornier just because he is more of a true point guard and you have more guys who can sort of fill the Zach LaVine shooter / just two-guard role, because you have Troy Brown who's been playing mostly a backup to LaVine. You have Valentine, you have Temple, who's, more of a straight wing, but still can also play that LaVine role. Like, I just think there's a lot of ways that you could end up just with them wanting a guy who distributes the ball. Like, that's why they gave Satoransky more minutes in the first place, because they needed a lower usage guy who actually just lets other people shoot.
Yeah, I think that makes some sense, but I still have to think that it's going to be largely Kobe White just because they're starting. Even if we say that it's a time split, I would still say probably something like 28 minutes to Kobe White and 20 to Archie Diacono just for the point guard minutes, and that would still be enough for me to get to him on DraftKings. And then FanDuel, obviously, 3,800. That's kind of a no-brainer.
All right, let's see. We haven't gotten the minutes update yet, but I'm just going to, just for the sake of this thought exercise here, I'll give Kobe White 28 minutes, give Arcidiacono 20, and then cut out Satoransky and see how that looks for me.
I don't even think Arcidiacono plays 20, by the way, though. I think
no,
it's,
yeah. It's just
I
to give
think
somebody the minutes.
Yeah, I think Kobe White plays more, and I think Arcidiacono plays a very minor role in the rotation, and then it's just kind of spread out. But the only guy who I think the only guys who I'm gonna have interest in from Chicago significantly are going to be Kobe White, and then a little bit of exposure to Vucevic.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Kobe White, I guess that I'm not giving him enough credit for, is he can probably play some point guard and 2 guard minutes. So maybe if you do see guy Arcidiacono get some minutes, more than I think would be safe to even project, it does seem like White could still be out there. So yeah, I'm okay with it. He doesn't jump out as like a massive play to me by any stretch, but I think still will be in the mix at 5K on DraftKings, and I don't hate it. I think still I would prefer the Pistons guys, but I guess, Greg, that's another thing now we can close the loop on fully with. You mentioned your FanDuel rankings. We didn't get to that yet, but give your FanDuel rankings now. And I guess how has anything moved now, because you didn't have Diallo in, now we know Diallo's in. So how does that change things, if at all, for Detroit?
Yeah, so on FanDuel, Diallo is only 4,100 and becomes a pretty strong shooting guard play now. 4,200 on DraftKings, he's also viable at small forward, but just because of the positionality on FanDuel and having to roster 2 shooting guards, that price point is really appealing. So Diallo to me actually becomes the second best Pistons play on FanDuel behind Isaiah Stewart for me.
All right, so we're at the halfway point of the show. We got an ownership run. Let's see when the most recent one was. 14 minutes ago. It's going to be different, but let's just do money time now, because I think we're going to have a lot of news in the back half of the show. So let me flip the hat. Hopefully our producer, Chris, has the cash register sound effect ready, and let's do the top 5 plays on DraftKings and FanDuel. So smash that like button, guys. These are for free for you guys today, but you can always get them yourself at awesemo.com/join. Your top 5 owned plays, corner ownership projections at Awesemo. Number 1, Isaiah Stewart on DraftKings, 36%. Number 2, Sadiq Bey, 30%. Number 3, Nikola Jokic, 29%. Number 4, Killian Hayes at 29%, but a slightly lower version. And number 5, Josh Jackson at 26%. We'll do FanDuel as well. Also, my boy Caleb Martin, number 6. So if you are like me and getting too much of him as a value play, he is going to be well represented today. On FanDuel, the top 5, Isaiah Stewart, number 1 at 47%. Number 2, Fred VanVleet at 37%. Number 3, Josh Jackson at 30%. Number 4, Bradley Beal at 29%. Number 5, Jimmy Butler, maybe a bit of a surprise here at 29%. How are you feeling about the latter 2 here, Greg, on FanDuel with Beal and Butler? These may move around because of the value that's opened up, but it's a lot of Jimmy Butler. I know it's the revenge game, whatever, blah, 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 positionality, all that stuff on FanDuel, that's important, but him being top 5 kind of surprises me.
It doesn't to me. I really like Jimmy Butler on FanDuel. He actually is the player at small forward that in the build I currently have, which is all going to change shortly anyway. But as of right now, the small forward I have the most exposure to. And as for Bradley Beal, I think the price and everything is warranted. The issue is that right now I prefer Fred VanVleet, CJ McCollum, Josh Jackson, and Hamidou Diallo all to Bradley Beal at shooting guard on FanDuel.
All right, here we got our first batch of news, and this is one we didn't even talk about yet, but it was an important one. Tobias Harris ruled out Friday, along with Seth Curry being ruled out Friday. So the Tobias one was one I guess you could have expected, though Doc Rivers certainly not always the most forthright with news, but did say that Tobias Harris is doubtful. Now he is out. Seth Curry is out. Dwight Howard is out. How does this is a little bit unexpected? I guess the Dwight part, maybe not the craziest given that he was out recently, but Seth Curry being out definitely opens up some more minutes, and I think might put Shake Milton into more serious contention.
I think it's going to be Furkan Korkmaz for me. So Korkmaz, who has started some games recently, saw him start on April 10th against the Oklahoma City Thunder. Korkmaz played 31 minutes and scored 41 and a half DraftKings points in that game overall for the season as a starter. Korkmaz is playing 28 and a half minutes per game and averaging 24.9 DraftKings points. So Korkmaz to me is the guy who I think I'm going to be getting to as the value play from the Sixers. I'll have to see the starting lineup to be sure, but based on what we've seen them do this year, I'm fairly confident Korkmaz is going to start.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable take to have it. And I just think for me, I would feel like there's going to be a trickle down that gets Milton more minutes just because I don't think Korkmaz is going to get minutes more from the Tobias side, I would think, than the Seth Curry side. I think the Seth side is what opens up Milton getting more minutes. I mean, to me, the point is there's now a lot of minutes to go around on the wing, and it's got to be either Korkmaz or Milton playing alongside Ben Simmons or Thibault, I guess, who picks up a good amount of run.
So the last time that Seth Curry missed a game, which by the way, Dwight Howard was in that game also, not that it matters. But so the last time Seth Curry was out for a game, Shake Milton played 22 minutes and Korkmaz played 26 and a half minutes.
Okay. So both guys getting enough minutes, I think, to be GPP plays, but yeah, Korkmaz, what is Korkmaz's price point? It's funny because we just got a projection update and our data team, which is obviously Alex is part of that. And now Sean's on, DeColts, Steve Buzzard involved in that as well. And these four guys get the projections out. There's so many things to change around. And then immediately there's another run of things that has to occur. And that's just the fun that goes on here at Awesemo all day long with things being a moving target. But Philadelphia, Korkmaz was already in for 22 minutes without Seth Curry being ruled out, with just Tobias being taken out. So yeah, I feel like if you just gave Korkmaz 4 of Curry's minutes, that still leaves 24 left. But Korkmaz seems like a value play. He's not minimum salary on DK. He's 3,800, but I think probably in the mix. How would you rank these guys in terms of the value that we have already? Because like Shake at 4,200, I think again projects pretty well for me, even with Seth Curry in. But I do think it's sort of hard to compare these guys. I'm gonna leave it up to the optimizer to make that judge. But like on the surface, I feel like these guys shouldn't be treated as good of a play as like a Detroit, which just has nobody at all left. Like, at least for Philadelphia, you still have Embiid and Simmons.
No, and to be clear, these guys are going to be in my player pool, but they're lower priority plays, especially compared to the Pistons guys. But we do have other news that we're going to have to right now. Did you happen to catch the odd starting lineup for the Toronto Raptors?
Let's see. We got Malachi Flynn, Fred VanVleet. Oh, Paul Watson. Okay. Chris Boucher and Kem Birch. So that part stayed steady. I figured Flynn would start with VanVleet. I thought Watson, they probably want to stagger Bembry away would be my guess, but Watson.
Yeah, that's the concern. They're like, oh, we have to stagger Bembry's minutes. I think they're just giving somebody else a look. I don't think there was any consideration to like, hey, we have to stagger DeAndre Bembry, this high usage guy. Like we can't play Fred VanVleet and DeAndre Bembry the same minutes.
I mean, more the ball handling part, Greg, you sassy boy, as always. So Bembry is the third ball handler they have, so they're going to rotate out, I would presume, at least one of VanVleet and Flynn and try to keep 2 ball handlers on the floor. But that is interesting. Paul Watson on the year, certainly not been super productive from a fantasy standpoint, 0.67 fantasy points per minute. He's minimum salary, so you could take that stab if you want. I had him in at 0.73 fantasy points per minute before whatever minutes that he's going to get now as a starter. I don't think Paul Watson should be hugely in the conversation, but I feel like he's now a guy, if you got 5%, you're probably not terribly mad.
So for the year, Paul Watson, he's playing 10 minutes per game, averaging 6.53 DraftKings points. So basically doing nothing. Here's the significance, though. I think this helps Fred VanVleet's assist rate a little bit and also his usage, because Paul Watson, he does absolutely nothing when he's on the court. He's in those 10 minutes per game, 0.4 assists per game, 12.6% usage, no fantasy production. So this is just something else that I think funnels the ball to be in Fred VanVleet's hands. So that helps him a little bit to me. I was already getting to Fred VanVleet, so it's not something that like massively changes him, but I think that could mean I get VanVleet in maybe a few more lineups.
Yeah, I was already getting a good amount of VanVleet. I'm waiting to recrunch everything, though. I think with the next run of projections we get, I just have to move on with my life and start doing it. But yeah, VanVleet, I think looks good. I get the logic about, Paul Watson too. He really hasn't shot a lot at the year, 12% usage rate for him. So it's not even like he's a guy who's just been playing poorly. And he's been knocking down his threes. Greg pointed out small sample size, but 45% shooter from deep going back to last year, actually a 47% shooter just this year from deep. Like Watson could be a GPP play. Now I'm talking myself into a little too much, but if he hits enough threes, like he could pay off that price point.
Well, yeah. Okay. So, but that's not even the question, because if somebody's starting at min price, odds, especially when a team's as shorthanded as the Raptors are, I have no doubt that he could pay off his price point, right? I mean, we get 5x value if he scores 15 fantasy points. The question is, does he score enough fantasy points to be relevant amongst the likes of the cheap Sixers guys we have in play, the cheap Pistons guys that we have in play? And so for me, that answer is going to be no. Like I'm going to have Paul Watson probably projected for, like 18 or 17 fantasy points, which is fine on, a lot of smaller slates, but I don't think that's going to be enough for this slate for me to get to him.
Okay, that's reasonable. I just think, it jumps out to me. They're facing an Orlando team that gives up 37.5% shooting from deep. Watson can knock down threes, and you just, without Gary Trent, I try to think of it sometimes in terms of like how the replacement players will look in relative to like the guys who are going to be out. Gary Trent was been chucking up a lot of threes, been shooting an unsustainable rate, but has certainly been getting his threes up. And I feel like there's a pathway here for Watson to shoot more threes, and he's been hitting them at a good clip going against a team that doesn't defend it meaningfully well. I think I could talk myself into Watson more that we talk about it, but we'll see what the minutes run is going to be. He was already in for 17 minutes from Awesemo. I feel like maybe that goes then 17 to Bembry and then 8 more minutes going to Watson. So he'd be maybe at 25. Not a guy who's going to probably pop up the most meaningfully on an optimizer, but I think not crazy to get some exposure. The other Raptors for you, Greg, I feel like Malachi Flynn has to go down a notch with both Bembry being in and also Van Vliet playing alongside him. Probably not the best for his rates, but what else are you getting from the Raptors? Because Boucher, I think probably a strong play here, especially knowing that he's now not going to be competing for minutes with Kem Birch, playing a lot more alongside him. But Flynn, I feel like is the one guy who takes a meaningful downgrade for me.
Yeah, I'm not really getting too significant about Malachi Flynn. The prices come up, and there's so many good value plays that, him now at 6,200 on DraftKings, that's just a relatively fair price for me. It could used to be a little bit higher, but like I say, on a lot of these big slates, it's hard for me to get to good plays when there are great plays available. So the guys that I'm really getting to from Toronto, a little bit of exposure to Malachi Flynn, and then Chris Boucher and Fred VanVleet are both popping up in a pretty significant percentage of my lineups.
Also, just worth pointing out for everybody out there, for when you're watching these Awesemo shows, I think especially the deeper dive and live before lock, with how the NBA has been, really try to make sure you're watching both shows. And this isn't me just plugging. I think it's an important part of the deeper dive and live before lock, where we're just probably not going to have time to talk about every play on the slate in the same depth that obviously the deeper dive guys do. Loughran and Adam, when Alex is rotating in, whoever it may be. Tomorrow it'll be me and Alex doing the show on Saturday, so tune into that. But I think it's just important to note to you guys where there's probably a lot of things that we can't hit on today just because of the moving target of all the news and this stuff moving around. But make sure you do watch the deeper dive in concert with this, because it is an important part, I think, to understand the whole slate as best you can. All right, so I got minutes here from Awesemo. Let's see, just to kind of close the loop on Toronto.
And Paul George is in, by the way.
Okay, that's good. That is helpful, I think, for everybody involved. Okay, so he's got Paul Watson getting 24 minutes, Bembry getting 21. I have Watson scoring 17.1 fantasy points at 24 minutes, and I think I'm okay with that. I think I'm going to play some Paul Watson tonight.
Yeah, my gut feeling is I'm going to have 0% of them, but I'm going to rerun my lineups I had Paul George out now that Paul George is in, and I assume Paul George is probably going to become somebody who ends up in like a decent clip of my lineups without Kawhi Leonard in there. So I'll see where my lineups end up after that. I'm fairly confident I'm going to have 0% Paul Watson though.
Like, he could really open some things up, and I think that's the main way I'm looking at Paul Watson. And when Paul Watson hits 10 3-pointers tonight, we'll all know the show that told you first that Paul Watson would do that in a very half-assed way that did not actually indicate any sort of approval. What's another important team for you right now? Because this is all going to move around a lot for me, and Charlotte was looking crucial to me earlier. I do think some of these guys may take a bit of a drop, but what else is looking very important that we haven't hit on yet? Because I think we've covered the main teams that are going to be pivot points in terms of just DFS pricing, these guys having a lot more opportunity than usual. But what else has jumped out to you that we haven't hit on yet?
Let me rerun my lineups and then pay up options. So Russell Westbrook, I think that he is going to be the guy that I'm getting to the most on the expense. And the other thing also is there's so much value on these Pistons guys that we have almost unlimited space to pay up for guys. Right. So to me, right now, Russell Westbrook is the guy that I'm getting to the most. I'm actually getting to some Ben Simmons now, which I was not expecting earlier. But with Tobias Harris out, Seth Curry out, Ben Simmons is somebody who projects a lot better for me than I was expecting. So Ben Simmons, somebody I'm going to be a little bit overweight to the field on. But my two most used pay up options, Russell Westbrook and Nikola Jokic, but Westbrook more so than Jokic. Who did you roster the most as an expensive play?
So my day is going to be a Nikola Jokic day, I think. And boy, also, I am getting some weird dudes in this crunch right now, and it's going to be very baffling. But Jokic, to me, the rates for him, and I think this is something where I'm kind of bummed the ownership is going to be as high on Jokic as it is, because I thought after that game against Miami, where he didn't quite show what the longer term sample size of court time without Jamal Murray showed, that maybe people wouldn't be there quite as much. They will be there pretty heavy, about 27% on DraftKings, 24% on FanDuel on the most recent ownership projections that I pulled. But Jokic's rates, 34% usage, 49% assist rate in court time without Jamal Murray. Like, those are really big numbers. And I don't think a guy like Aaron Gordon being in meaningfully hurts it that much, because he's mostly on the receiving end of assists from Jokic. He really hasn't been generating a lot of assist upside for himself, or at least more for Denver than he did for Orlando. Like, I think Jokic, to me, against Houston, against Christian Wood, and I guess maybe some Olenek, some Jayshawn Tate at center, like I guess DJ Wilson, some center time, like anybody he goes against, Jokic should absolutely destroy. And I feel like he's a tough guy to move away from, even with Embiid looking better without Harris and without Curry and whoever else is going to be out now for the Sixers.
Yeah, I mean, I have Jokic in a third of my lineups right now. I have a little bit more Westbrook than that, but I mean, I'm pretty invested in Jokic today. I think he's a really strong play. The only thing that takes away from him a little bit to me, this is more so than FanDuel than a DraftKings thing, but just that he's center eligible. It's just easier to get to players when they're playing at other positions. And there's so many centers that I like on this slate. That's really the main reason that I got to Westbrook more than Jokic. I have Jokic project for more fantasy points than Westbrook. It's just a matter of the position they play.
I do like the idea of going to Westbrook for positionality reasons, just because, you know, you're going to be getting different than from on DraftKings. 30% of the field is going to be on Killian Hayes. And I think even if Hayes has like the day that we were talking about earlier, where he puts up, 30 fantasy points, you're probably happy as a value play. If Westbrook puts up 60, like, you're really still kind of screwed there unless you get a comparably good value play somewhere else from Hayes. And I do think that you probably do have like value plays you could pair with Westbrook that I think have a similar range of outcomes to Hayes. So I think paying up at point guard to me just seems like a spot you can get away with it more. And it gives me concern because Westbrook always projects a little bit lower for me than he probably should. And I'm not going to have a lot of Westbrook, but I do think paying up point guard, whether it be to a Westbrook tier or just trying to get to the Roziers, the Van Vliets of the world, like, I think that's one big differentiation point you'll have, especially on DraftKings, because so many people are going to be playing Hayes. And I just don't love value point guards unless they're like amazing per minute producers.
It's, well, like I said, I mean, I have Jokic for more fantasy points than Westbrook. And the other thing also with Killian Hayes is, he's only, I thought he might've been shooting guard eligible for a second, but no, only point guard eligible. But still, I mean, there's another spot to play them in because you get the point guard, the guard, and the utility spot, whereas the center is only 2 spots. So, I mean, I'm overweight to the field on Hayes and Westbrook. I don't think it's that hard to get exposure to both of them meaningfully.
No, that's fair. I just think with Hayes, like, yeah, you do have 3 spots to roster him in, but like, are you going to put Hayes in your guard or utility spot, that we're going to be late games, you could swap around and give that up early? I feel like that's one thing this season has showed us with the NBA that it's maybe not the best move. So to me, I'm either playing Hayes in the regular point guard spot or I'm not getting him. And I don't know. I'm curious how the sorting process works, because Hayes is coming up in my crunch, but I don't think I want him very much. And I'd rather have a Van Vliet. I'd rather have Rozier. I'd rather have a lot of different directions, and including Westbrook too. Just a lot of ways to get away there, And Shake Milton too, another play that I think is a little bit more expensive. And I think to me has a better floor and a ceiling, I think, than Killian Hayes may, though. I guess with nobody left for Detroit, that could be a bit more in question.
To your point about the start time of the games, the thing is all the games start at about the same time, other than that Knicks Mavericks game, which I don't really care about anyway. The Blazers Spurs game, that's a little later. Obviously, the Damian Lillard news is going to be pretty relevant there, but everything else, I feel like we have all the news we're waiting on now, right? I mean, other than Damian Lillard, who else is really questionable that is going to like massively change the outlook of the slate?
Well, like, if you get the news about Lillard between 7 and 7:30 East Coast time.
And Diallo's out now. You know what's so annoying about this is, so Diallo ruled out now. I had said before that I'm just assuming Diallo's out, right? And then he got ruled in, and it's like, oh crap, now I have to change my Pistons guys. Now he's out again, and I have to go in and do that. But all right, so Damian Lillard's out, and the Diallo one.
This crunch is worthless. I don't even know what to do now because I'm running a crunch, but it's like a pointless crunch. And we need, oh God, hopefully the minutes elves working behind the scenes for Awesemo come out fast, because the Lillard McCollum thing. So here's the thing with McCollum. He's basically been Damian Lillard historically when Lillard's been out. The issue for me is that, you have Norman Powell in there, who's actually a legitimate guy who can get his own shot, can create for others a little bit. Like, it does to me make McCollum probably not as likely to be just a straight 1-to-1 swap for Lillard, but it does make him like still, I think have a more capped ceiling that I'm worried I'm going to get too much McCollum in the hopes that he's going to be that same dude. And I don't know that he can be that same dude just because of having Powell in there.
Yeah, so what's bothering me is that I'm almost jealous that everybody gets this news at this point because I was already assuming he was out. Now it's like I should only be allowed to play CJ McCollum. Other people shouldn't just be allowed to because they conveniently waited for the news. I was already assuming this. I guessed correctly. That should count for something.
We did just get a projection update. Please tell me this is no Lillard's still in it. Damn it. I am big boned. This one. I just hate having to run. Like I like to get my 2000 lineup crunch going, and there is now no chance of getting to 2000 lineups. I think when this minutes come through.
Well, here's what I do when I'm in a pinch. I just especially because sometimes we don't have the time to, actually be able to update everything. I'll just be like, all right, just blindly. I'll go into fantasy crunch and just be like, all right, I'm just giving a bunch of these guys, like this guy, 3 extra fantasy points, this guy, 2 extra fantasy points, and running again. Because there are sometimes, right now, 12 minutes until lock. That's actually enough time. But there's sometimes where literally we find out 5 minutes before a game starts that somebody's out. And if I actually sit there and think about it too much, then by the time I'm able to make moves, it's already too late.
All right, I'm just gonna get a projection in for these guys and run it because I don't know if we'll get this fast enough. Hopefully, you guys will get it fast enough when not hosting a live stream and trying to keep talking out loud. So I kept McCollum's minutes flat. I gave some of Lillard's minutes to Anthony Simons, which I gave him 20. I feel like he also looks like a decent value play. It might be a little bit too aggressive a projection. It's just me kind of throwing something in so I can run a crunch here. And here's a question I would have for you, Greg. Is it worth maybe just putting McCollum in now and hoping he does have a nice day because people won't be there as heavy as they should be given the fact this is moving around? And no matter what projections you're using, unless they're your own and you're also amazingly good at recrunching minutes, like you're not going to get enough McCollum, I would think, in time.
Yeah, I think McCollum's a really strong play now. Like McCollum, if he was like 30% owned on this slate, he would still end up being in my lineups just because of how highly I view him on slates without Damian Lillard. And that's already about what I had for him. So I don't really have to make any adjustments to my particular lineups for the Damian Lillard news. The Pistons guys are just going to be everywhere for me now. Like I'm going to get just dumb looking lineups with Pistons because 10 minutes into lock, I'm not going to have enough time to really comb through it and try to make sure that I get specific amounts of Pistons everywhere. I'm just going to run the optimizer and be it where it may with the guys are where they are for me right now. But I'm going to be getting to just an egregious amount of Detroit players.
All right, I'm going to do something that I would not normally do, but we had a projections update, and unfortunately, they're just changing too many things at once, and Lillard is still in the projections. I am just going to lock McCollum in and just hope it works out. That's what I'm going to do on the optimizer level. That is my approach. Obviously, salt's a taste for everything. That is always going to be the case with DFS and the risk profile. And now it's funny because you got the Diallo thing right, then got it wrong, then got it right. That was a little microcosm of what I experienced with Dennis Schroeder yesterday.
Yeah, I was able to just kind of roll back to what I had before. And then of course, while I was talking, Google Chrome crashed on me. So now I don't even know what I have on my computer right now. By the way, Derek Jones is starting for the Blazers in place of Damian Lillard.
And there is the Lillard projection update. So if you guys are running Awesemo projections, you can now grab that. Lillard is out. McCollum has taken the requisite jump upwards. I'm just going to paste these minutes in, and I think I might just have to do 500 lineups tonight and hope that's enough to not be completely shit on this slate. I honestly doing a live before lock show. I hope we appreciate all you guys for watching along with us, dealing with the process, dealing with us not being able to answer questions greatly. Here's an interesting one. So with the minutes that Awesemo gave, McCollum doesn't look like a great play to me, which I'm surprised by, but that actually gives me concern now about locking McCollum on the crunch.
I had McCollum in, I think it was 35% of my lineups before. It's probably going to be about the same, although maybe that goes up a little bit just because there's a marginal amount more value with the Pistons. But to me, you take Damian Lillard off the court and you look at the numbers that CJ McCollum has had in the past in games without Damian Lillard, and it is really difficult for me to avoid him.
That is reasonable. I am, Yeah, I think I'm going to get more Norman Powell. I'm just going to run this crunch and hope. And for what it's worth for you guys out there, here's a free one. I think we have some free things on the site today that I do not have in front of me, but the projection for CJ McCollum, I'll give to you guys for free. 43.8 DK points is the projection on there. And then for FanDuel, McCollum, 41.6 on FanDuel, obviously accounting for the different stats and all that. So McCollum looks to be a top play, but I think the price point, man, that price point on FanDuel looks more appealing, I think, than the one on DraftKings.
Yeah, I mean, it's cheaper, so there's no doubt about that. That it's
just
better,
from a construction standpoint, but yes, obviously, the cheaper is always going to be a good thing.
Actually, so Derek Jones being in the starting lineup, I also think, I mean, right now this is just going to be like confirmation bias on my part, but I think that also helps them a little bit, just because we're adding a really low usage player in place of Damian Lillard, right? It's not like they're starting one of the guards who actually shoots off the bench. Like they're going with Derek Jones.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that, also a guy who relies exclusively on assists. So theoretically a little bit more. Arcathel is saying Awesemo trying to keep people off McCollum. I'm saying for me, he doesn't pop as much. Greg is saying play McCollum. So I don't think Awesemo or the projections are doing anything. It's just a matter of what you prioritize. And I think I may prioritize a little bit more of Rozier and a little bit more Norman Powell, who just took a very big jump up for me in a way that CJ McCollum did not. So that was something I was hinting at earlier that I thought would be a reason for concern. And like Nurkic became a better play to me too, just because of the usage going around without Lillard out there.
Yeah, I'm just doing one final update to my lineups and just hoping that Chrome doesn't crash out on me again. But yeah, McCollum's coming up now that I have Derek Jones starting there. Like, by the way, McCollum, who I've projected for about 45.5 fantasy points for me on DraftKings, he's coming up in about half my lineups now at this point. So I really like CJ McCollum. I'm getting to a little bit of Norman Powell, but it's really CJ McCollum is the guy for me on the Blazers.
All right. Other guys that I'm getting today, I'm still getting Kyrie, I guess, on the crunch level. I think this is a team that we haven't hit on at all, but with the Charlotte value out there, or some of those plays, I do think playing a Brooklyn guy is one way to maybe get different with those guys. Though honestly, the Charlotte value may be a little bit less of a factor as the ownership gets updated here. Caleb Martin dropping, McCollum just on my mind now. Caleb Martin dropping a little bit. Terry Rozier dropping as you would expect as well. I probably even more now because of McCollum taking a jump up. But how are you feeling about Brooklyn? Are you getting any Kyrie or Kevin Durant, or I guess anything more than a nominal amount because of the price points?
No, I didn't have any Kevin Durant earlier. I know that's not the case. I'm not positive if I have Kyrie Irving in my player pool or not right now, just because I'm updating my my final lineups and uploading them. I know earlier I had a little bit of CJ McCollum, but I mean, I'm not a CJ McCollum, of Kyrie Irving, but now that we have like Paul George in play, I think that might have pinched Kyrie for me. I'm going to check that in a second to know for sure. And my lineups are updated with about 4.5 minutes to spare. All right. So my exposures, do I have any Kyrie? I have no Kyrie in my player pool right now.
Okay. I don't know how much I'm going to get, but I am going to get some Kyrie. I guess you want to take some of the questions from the Slack if you got your lineups in, because I am now going to work on mine. Oh, we also got ownership updated 27 seconds ago. If you are an Awesemo Plus member, go check it out. Actually, nothing changed too crazily in the top 5 so far. More Westbrook, though, soaring up because people have money to spend.
All right. From Fantasy Wiz, he's asking Caleb Martin or Paul George and Caleb Martin, or CJ McCollum and Sadiq Bey. That is CJ McCollum and Sadiq Bey for me. Also, another one from Fantasy Wiz is DeMar DeRozan, a fade on FanDuel. He's not somebody in my player pool, and it's not even because I think DeRozan is a bad play just from a points per dollar sense. It's just that there's so many good plays now around that price range and at the position that it's really hard for me to prioritize him. From Giles, Korkmaz and Milton in the same lineup for me. And have we seen the starting lineup yet for the 76ers?
I do not think so. I don't think. Let me just check.
Well, the game starts in 3 minutes, so.
Yeah, no, nothing's come out about that yet. So yeah, why would they tell you?
Let me just see. Let me scroll and see if I missed it in our Slate. Yeah, I'm almost positive we just don't have a starting. Oh, here we do. Never mind. My bad. News got posted earlier. It is Ben Simmons, Furkan Korkmaz, Draymond Green, Mike Scott, and Joel Embiid. So to me, I'm not prioritizing Shake Milton today. I pretty highly do prioritize Furkan Korkmaz at this point. He is in I have ownership to him in the teens. So Korkmaz to me is the priority there. I wouldn't play him and Shake Milton in the same lineups. I don't think that's necessary. Ken
I also
Birch
think
or
you
Danny.
said Draymond Green, just to be clear.
Oh, Danny Green. My bad.
Honestly, Draymond Green, not a bad fit for the Sixers, though. You get another guy who can't shoot alongside Ben Simmons. That'd be fun.
By the way, we don't have time. I was going to say Draymond Green shot 39% from 3 one year, and he just teams guard him like he is Lou Dort last year in the playoffs. They've run away from him when he touches the ball.
Oh, that's one guy we haven't talked about at all, by the way, that I know people are obsessed with, Lou Dort. Did you get any Dort today? Because I did not. I don't think I'm going to at all, and I just feel like we have to cover it because he did score almost 60 fantasy points last time out.
No, I don't have Lou Dort exposure.
Okay. Yeah. Same for me. You can keep going here. I'm now at the part of pasting things in. I did not get nearly enough lineups, but that is going to be life for today.
All right. Korkmaz or Caleb Martin. That is Korkmaz for me. Birch or what's that?
Caleb Martin for me.
Well, it is not for me.
How dare you?
Hey, you let me control the show while you update your lineups. Everybody gets my answers. You have no say in the matter here, Spags. Ken Birch or Daniel Tice, said is Ken Birch for me. Let's see. What are some of the other ones here now? Those are the recent ones. And then if I go back further, I'm not even sure if these questions are relevant anymore. He's at Swanson79 asked us Denzel Valentine thoughts on DraftKings. I don't have exposure to Denzel Valentine.
I was getting a lot in my crunch. I don't know. I will check my exposure in a second here because I'm just going to upload my lineups because we have a mere minute left as I'm saying this out loud to get this stuff in. But I will say it in 1 second. Okay. I am so glad. I was thinking about playing FanDuel because I was a little bit tilted about yesterday because I was winning a grand or two. And then all of a sudden it came down when Kemba Walker didn't get back in the game. I was going to play both sides and be I don't care if it's live before lock. Going to play both. Very grateful I did not today. Who were we talking about again?
Denzel Valentine. Actually, I'm not going to say I'm not going to say I have zero exposure to him. That's not true, but I don't have a significant amount of exposure to him. There's other value plays I like, but Denzel Valentine is actually my player pool.
I got a little bit more than 2x the field on him. He's at 8%. I got close to 20. So I don't know.
Well, that takes us to lock. Did you get your lineups in time?
I sure did. By the barest of margins. I don't know the quality of them. I mean, relative to the usual, they're probably slightly worse. But yeah, that was tough. It's always the 1-by-1 trickles of news where then you have to wait for the updates and all that and then go. And that's always what really screws with me, especially while hosting a show where it's could be a great day, it could be a terrible day. I really have no read on it at all.
Well, really quick, I'm going to ask, we just got Arcathelza did ask us, do you like Nurkic now on DK? He's a very low priority play for me. I have him in a couple of lineups, but nothing significant. I still have Valanciunas, Ken Birch, Vucevic, Jokic, Boucher, Isaiah Stewart, all centers I like more than him. So if you play him, I don't have an issue with it, but he's not a high priority play.
I think he jumped up for me, but I would agree here. I'd rather take the value or would have rather taken the value now that the Detroit game's locked with Isaiah Stewart or going up to Jokic and Embiid also locked. But those were my moves for center today. So, I think Nurkic is a fine play, but yeah, he's not quite on the same tier as some of these other centers we had. Oh boy. All right. Anything else here before we call it quits? I can summon up the energy to do some plugs for everything, but give us your plugs, Greg. People could follow you at Ehrenberg DFS. You have any shows coming up this weekend or anything else you want to say to the people?
I'm just gonna plug to the basketball gods. Just be kind to us. No more late scratches. No more news. We've gotten our fill. Let's just carry on with the slate. And good luck to everybody tonight.
Yeah, follow at Chris Spags, follow at Ehrenberg DFS, follow at Awesemo_com. Tune in this weekend. I'll be on the deeper dive tomorrow. Subscribe, hit the notification bell to see all the content we have going on. Just because the business weekends does not mean the shows here and on the Awesemo YouTube channel for every sport out there. So tune into that. We appreciate you guys for watching and sticking with us amidst another hectic NBA slate. So enjoy your weekends, enjoy your nights. Good luck. Whew, fucking shit.